Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 315, our Dark Knight Rises extravaganza. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, drnorge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the whatnot Segulin, and the Duke of you know.
Swear to me!
Jim, the best laid plans. When we originally announced this episode, we were going to do Dark Knight Rises and Batman Earth 1. The problem was our Dark Knight Rises discussion really went a lot farther than we thought, which anybody who's seen the film can understand why. So our next episode, episode 316, which is going to be airing August 1st, is going to feature Batman Earth 1. So we're not ignoring that. We're not dropping it. We are going to have that on that show. We're going to do Batman Earth 1 and begin discussing Before Watchmen on that next episode. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network and the League of Comic Book Podcasts. Sponsoring us this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com, you can pick up the 52 Omnibus hardcover. This is $150 regularly, 40% off, only $90. It collects the entire 52-issue year-long run of the 52 series. If you haven't read this, or if you read it and loved it as much as I did, this is a great opportunity to grab the whole thing in one really nice bundle. It's Grant Morrison, Jeff Johns, Greg Rucka, Mark Waid, Keith Giffen. Incredible series. Remember that DCBService.com is a Comixology digital partner. And remember, any of your digital purchases you make at DCBService.com, start building 5% of that purchase in credit towards any purchase you make from DCBService.com. It doesn't cost you any more to shop digitally on their website. It's the same exact price that you would do it if you bought it for any apps or right from their digital websites. So make sure to buy from our sponsor, DCBService.com. Over at InStockTrades.com, they're running a really cool special, and I've mentioned this previously this month. They've got a 60% off DC trade paperbacks. They have certain trade paperbacks that are 60% off, plus they're also doing 50% off archive editions from DC. This is a great time to stock up on some of those collections that you want at an amazing discount. I want to thank DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com for continuing to support our show. Oh, Jim, what kind of a podcast are we?
Raging Bullets is a spoiler podcast. We go in-depth into plotline, story twists, and whatnot of The Dark Knight Rises. So, if you haven't seen the movie, you may want to come back later so you can better enjoy the show.
Let's get down to it, buddy.
To the Batmobile. Let's go.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
You're ready to move up.
Jim, this episode we're going to talk about Dark Knight Rises. I went to that marathon. It started at 6:30 and went till 3 in the morning. At least. It might have been 3:15 because there was a lot of trailers in front of Dark Knight Rises, including Man of Steel. And then I saw it the next night. I went on Friday with my wife, and she and I went to go see it, and it was great to see it again and to have that whole experience. I'm just going to throw it right out there, just initial impressions of the whole film. I loved it more the second time. I was blown away the first time. I was in awe of it. And sometimes when you see a movie the second time, because you know everything that happened in the film, it loses something. In this case, I actually felt like it gained more because I was then watching it, seeing the setup to everything that played out in the film. So for me, it was an actual joy. Nolan did it again. It was 3 in a row that were just amazing. I do feel like my mentality now is that the film is one big thing. It's Batman Begins, Dark Knight, and then Dark Knight Rises. It's one big story, kind of what like Lord of the Rings was, versus me thinking of them now as 3 separate films, which I think that's the major change from this whole thing. Before, I used to always say Batman Begins was my favorite. Now I look at this as one entity with the way that it all went. And I think it's because of the marathon experience of seeing how these all interconnected. But what was your, how did you walk out of this? What was your experience? When did you see it, and how did that work for you?
Well, I couldn't do the marathon that you did, and I ended up seeing it on Friday during the day, so it was kind of nice. Relatively empty movie theater, wasn't completely packed, so you could spread out your wings and just relax and enjoy the experience. And I'll tell you, I think Meatloaf put it best when he said 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
So how did you really feel about it?
Yeah, no, there's no way I'd pull that off.
Yeah.
It was funny. I did get a couple emails from people saying, "You're not going to try one of those stupid sensei swerves and say you didn't like it, right? Come on." And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to try. I know it's not going to work, but I'm going to try.
I was kind of wondering if you're going to do I Would Do Anything for Love, but I won't do that. I don't know. I didn't know where you're going with this, but I was trying to figure out what Meatloaf song or Bat Out of Hell.
That would have been a pretty good one.
I didn't know where you were going with this, but
Yes. Oh, yeah. Seriously, I walked away, and I actually wish I could have been able to do that marathon after seeing the movie, because that had to have been just an experience, seeing one after another after another. Unfortunately, I had to work on Friday, so if I could have been able to pull off the marathon on Thursday, leading up to midnight, I would have done it, but I had to be at work at crack of dawn on Friday, so that just killed that concept. But this movie for me was like, holy crud. I throughout the movie, I periodically said, oh my God, and I was just like shocked, stunned, amazed, and I was sitting there going, he pulled off Bane. I didn't think he could do it. I was like, there's no way you could tell that massive epic story of Bane in just one movie, even if you make it a really long movie. Well, they did Bane. And, it wasn't 100% true to the comic book character Bane, but it was true to his character. It was true to, who he was, what he was about, why he did what he did, and how he went about it. It was 100% true to that core of who Bane is. And for me, that was huge. They didn't follow the story. It was kind of a combination of Bane and the Cult, which I thought was a really nice combination of bringing in those story elements to it. And I was just like, oh my God, this was something that I didn't see coming. I didn't, there are swerves throughout this that just, holy crud. I was like, I knew it was coming, but even when you see it on the screen, you're like, oh my God, I didn't even think that little twist to it. Oh, wow. And it was a lot of just, stunned amazement and sheer joy in this movie. And I tell you, there's a chance that if I hear people complaining about this, I may get violent, because this is my favorite of the three. And we always kept saying, oh, whatever movie I'm watching is my favorite. This one is truly the favorite because it took elements that I didn't like in the last movie and fixed them. And it made sense why different stuff happened in the movie. There's parts I was like, I don't know about this. And now I'm like, oh my God, that was a great storytelling element. This is awesome. This is a true Batman Bruce Wayne story. And this movie did something that no other Batman story I've ever seen or read has ever done. It gave us a definitive ending for the character. It gave us a definitive ending for Bruce Wayne and let him be his own man, let him be his life. And I loved that about this story.
That's not true. That's not true. That's not true. That's happened in comics before, but I will co-sign with you that I think that this film did it better than any other story that I've ever read before.
I've never read those stories. Mm-hmm. I've never read a story, never seen a story. And I'll actually even argue most superhero movies won't do what this movie did, giving the character a definitive ending. Even, when they've killed off characters, they've kept it kind of open for returning or kept it kind of opening for continuations of stories. This movie right here said, done. End of story. Bam. And I love that for the movie. I was like, this has been a great trilogy, a great run, and I just, wow.
I 100% agree with you. It's funny, as you were talking it through, I was thinking the same way until as you were talking it through, I started thinking to myself, but realistically, if Gotham went through some horrible turmoil again, this movie did leave room for him to come back. I mean, he's not dead. So anytime a superhero is not dead and there's the possibility of somebody taking over, which is the way that with Blake, they kind of left it with this film, that Blake could become the new Batman, there is always the possibility that Bruce could return because he's still alive. I think by the very nature of the fact that he's still alive, it could be, something draws him back to Gotham because he sees some horrible thing going on in the news and he could do that. What I liked about it is I really walked out just like you did. I'm not disputing you when I say that. I walked out of this movie feeling like it was an ending. And it was a satisfactory ending. Not satisfactory, it's a tremendous ending. I love seeing moments, and we do see them in the comics from time to time, where we get to see Bruce wind up truly happy. I love that he wound up with Selina. I think that was something through the film. Everything that happened in that film, from Alfred revealing what actually happened with Rachel, straight on through to him connecting with Selina on some level, realizing that she was something more. And in many ways, I think saving her and her soul meant saving his own. Like, he was helping her to see his life, and through connecting, and his dedication to the city and seeing that she had those elements in there, that part of her that would say, this is an injustice going on here. And there is that part of me that wants to stamp out injustice, because he saw her stand up for friends. He saw her stand up for that little kid. There were times where, stamping out social injustice and all that type of thing was something that she stood for. So he connected with that. But I also think that through doing that, that opened him up to things that Alfred had been telling him all along. That fun side of her wanting to live life, embrace life. I think what he went through in that prison, that fear of dying, needing to embrace that, gave him a sense of, hey, life's worth living. Maybe it's time for me to finally live life and give Alfred his dream, because it's something that I can have for myself now. It kind of helped him to go full circle. I loved that, because there was not a point in time in that film where I'm like, this isn't true to Bruce Wayne. This is exactly who this character is. They managed to, in 3 movies, completely capture him at the core of everything I love about the character. I think sometimes superhero movies lose the balance of giving you the hero while developing a great villain story. It's sometimes you focus on one or the other too much. One of the elements gets lost in the shuffle. Nolan's films have done a terrific job of capturing all of the villains and all of the heroes in a way where you feel like you know them by the end of the film and what they stand for. I love that we never lost Bruce in any of these. And that was something, it really came home in this film, the journey he took Bruce Wayne on. And I think that's something, I'm a huge fan. This isn't a knock on any other Batman film that's ever come out. I've loved all of them. And I think that it's really hard to do full comparisons of them, because I think each one defines an era and a mentality and a storytelling that was going on at that time, and also a world condition that was going on at that time. Batman's one of those characters that's very adaptable. But the one thing that makes this one of my absolute favorite Batman film series and films of all time is the fact that this really focused heavily on the main character of Bruce Wayne, in and out of the cowl. There was a nice balance of that character. And I think it's something that anybody making a superhero film needs to remember. A secret identity is important to develop and flesh out and help us to get to know that guy as well. How does he deal with day-to-day? What does that turmoil look like? How does his superhero life affect his day-to-day life? This movie series really hammered that home. There were major consequences to the people he associated with and the moves that he made to his personal, professional, every aspect of his life. And I loved that about these films. I thought it was something that was really a true strength of this film series. I felt like I know more about Bruce Wayne now than I knew at the start of this film series. And I feel like nothing here in theme and in tone contradicted the comics. Yes, they took some liberties with things and they, made them Nolan verse, quote unquote. But you can say the same thing about, the great animated series with the Tim and Dini verse and what they did over there. I thought that stuff was terrific. And they, did in their own way, took their own liberties as well, too. But when you capture the character at its core, that's when you do something special. And I think the animated comparison I'm making is really valid, because I think that series did a terrific job of capturing Batman at its core. And I think this film series has done just that. I've watched all of the films leading up to this, including the animated one that DC put out with the short features. And I've got to say, when I was watching Batman Begins and Dark Knight in the theater during the marathon, I turned to my buddy Chris and I said, I've noticed something. I never tire of these movies. I like watching them over and over again. For me, they have that Star Wars factor, because I just remember as a kid running home when we first got Showtime. and we had HBO as well. It was, during the early days of cable when Star Wars first hit. It was on constantly. You'd rush home. It didn't matter what point in time the film was on, whether it was, the middle of the film or the start of the film or towards the end. You turned it on and you watched.
Yeah.
And you then when it came on later in the day, you threw it on again and maybe watched the stuff that you missed earlier and then ended up watching the whole thing all the way through. That was Star Wars rewatchability for me as a kid. These films make me feel like that again because I want to watch them over and over and over again for the experience. I'm glad the ending was uplifting because it felt really good. It was an emotional roller coaster at that ending because I thought they were going to kill him. There was twice during the film where I was convinced, and that was where I walked in with an open mind thinking to myself, oh, it could go A or B. I could see it going A or B with the way that Nolan had been talking, and I felt like that was what Nolan wanted you to do. He wanted you to walk in feeling that the real possibility was there. There was twice during the film where I thought he was going to die. The first time was when Talia stabbed him, and Bane had had it around his throat. I didn't think he was going to die necessarily there, but I felt like, okay, she stabbed him in the gut. We see her twisting the knife. I think he's going to win at the end, but it's going to be so much damage has been done to him that he's going to die saving Gotham.
Okay.
And then the second part where I thought he was going to die for me was when, obviously, the hovercraft was going over, and I thought, they're really going to blow him up.
Yeah.
They're really going to do it. And they got me there. I will 110% admit I'm not going to say that I was one of the guys sitting there going, oh, they can't have done that. That was the part where I was convinced there was no way out. I'm like, they blew him up. We know the autopilot didn't work. I didn't even think to myself that it's Batman. He would have, he would have fixed the autopilot 6 months ago when Lucius first told him that.
Yeah.
I didn't even think that, and I loved how that all played out, but they got me there. I've got to 100% admit, I'm not going to pretend like, oh, it was some kind of genius, and I caught that. And for anybody listening that did catch that, and if you caught that, Jim, hats off to you. I did not catch that. I was kicking myself when the reveal happened when Lucius caught that. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. But did you get? Oh, and actually, let's go there now. Did you think that he was going to die, or did you see that he was going to survive this?
Well, first off, the scene with Talia, I got to tell you, I had a different swerve in mind throughout that. And this is something that with Talia, I'm kicking myself on. Obviously, I knew that was Talia, and I knew she's Roz is her father and all that stuff. But the way they were playing it out, I was thinking Talia and Bane were brother and sister. And that's how they were going to go with it, and that was going to be the swerve. That when he announces that, Talia is like, yeah, I gave the detonator to my sister. So I was thinking that the whole time. So when that swerve finally happened, when the knife goes in, I'm not thinking that's going to kill Batman. I'm thinking, okay, here comes the big swerve that they're brother and sister. Like, oh no, and then they go through that whole Talia swerve that it just completely threw me. So I never thought he was going to die there. I was actually kind of thinking, either Alfred was going to show up for the save or it was going to be Catwoman. I knew it was one of those two was going to pop in for that, and I was thinking maybe if it was Catwoman, maybe we'd have a Talia versus Catwoman fight, or I was kind of thinking different stuff, waiting for that to happen. Now, the other point when he's flying away in the bat, I 100% thought he was dead. I was like, this is going to be the ending. And I had that same feeling I had back in the Star Trek movies when they blew up the Enterprise, when they actually detonated the Enterprise and they had to sacrifice the Enterprise, detonating the Genesis project and all that. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. And it was just like, I had that just like, holy crud moment. I'm sitting up in my seat. I was literally, just anticipating, just waiting. I'm like, wow. And I'm thinking, first thought that popped in my head was like, man, fans are going to crucify him for this. But I loved it. I was just like, this, because through everything that this movie was playing out, it was explaining away, it was bringing forward this whole complete universal feel. I was like, this is awesome. This is what I wanted from, it's what I wanted from the movie, but I didn't realize I wanted it at the time. Leading into the movie, this kind of stuff never entered my head as this would be a great way to end the movie. I would have said, that'd be kind of lame to kill off Batman. But just actually how it played out, how it happened, I was like, this is wonderful. This is perfect. And then the movie continued. And we started seeing the people, continue on afterwards. And I'm like, son of a gun, he's still alive. And before the first big reveal, I knew he was alive just because the movie had that lighthearted, happier ending where people were continuing, people were surviving. Gotham was living on. And I was like, dude, he's got to be still alive. And so it was funny at the funeral scene, I'm looking in the background trying to see if I can see a shadow, a shadowy figure, because I'm like, he's got to be still. He's got it. And I'm just sitting there anticipating. And you get that first reveal that he's alive with Lucius. And I was like, yes! Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did cheer out loud in the movie theater. I'm not 100% certain because everything was just kind of like, I don't know if it was in my head or if I was actually saying that out loud, but I literally was just cheering for that, that moment, because I'm like, yes, he's still alive. And it was just and it wasn't just a yes, cool, they can continue on the series, but just how they're playing it, because he is the Batman. Of course he's going to fix the problem 6 months ago. I'm like, oh yeah. And it was just this great, just kind of uplifting feeling. And I was like, this is awesome. And if you can't tell, I was a little excited by it.
Oh, I said out loud, he's alive. I did. I mean, my love for Batman. I mean, it was such an emotional roller coaster. And I agree with you that even if it had ended with him dying how Nolan did it, I would have been fine, because I just felt like the story that was told there was so great. I loved the moment. And I mean, in my attitude always, even if he blew him up there, if somebody really wanted to bring this Batman back, there's always a storytelling way to do it, just like it happens in comics. We've seen Batman die before. But I still, to me, it's the emotional resonance of the moment. If you're going to do a death of a character or tease a death of a character like they did, you have to do it in a way where it's believable and there's an emotionally powerful moment there. And what they did is they gave us that. In that moment, I was like gripping onto my chair. And I was like, they're going to kill him here. They're going to do it. They're going to kill him here. And it was something where I was emotionally on that journey with Batman in those moments versus it being something that was cheap and just done to say you could do it. So I loved how that all played out. It was something that was important. There's two storylines I want to connect with this before we go into the film, because what I'd like to do is kind of chronologically go through the events of the film, going back to Talia's escape and stuff like that, but kind of go in a chronological order and talk about how we felt about how this story played out. But before we do that, it was funny when you were talking about Talia and Bane. At first they were teasing that Bane was Ra's son, or Raz's son, how they pronounce it in the film. It was all, you look back and you watch it the second time and you see that they never confirmed that in the jail. Bruce was trying to put together the tidbits that they were giving him, and that's how he connected those dots. Bane being the protector of Talia. I connected that in many ways with Secret Six and Bane and Scandal. That kind of way. We didn't lose the power of Bane, but that fierce way that he was in that prison kind of letting her escape. I really connected that with the Scandal Savage relationship in Secret Six as being like, wow, this is really true to Bane. And the way that we've seen that character. He does have that side of him, and yet it doesn't lose the same guy who can do what he did with Gotham the way that he did. And that was something I always liked about Secret Six, is you could see a different twist to the guy and see a compassion to the guy and a need to protect something pure like that worked. And I think that also goes back to when he hears that child doing the national anthem later. But then the other storyline that I think connects deeply with this is No Man's Land. When when the bridges are all blown up except for the one, and basically the government, in their own way, has told Gotham they're on their own. Yeah. That goes back a lot to stories like No Man's Land as well. And I'm not taking anything away. Every story you listed, I'm not re-referencing them because I agree with you. I think those stories are all valid and present here. But I thought those were stories that were pretty essential as well here. Before we go talking about the film, Jim, though, I want to very quickly, I think we have to talk about what happened in Colorado.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. I just want to spend a minute or two talking about that because, we had this horrible event happen where there was a shooting in the theater. And I'm not going to pretend I'm some kind of expert on it where I know every little minute detail. I just, it's one of those things where anybody listening that was affected by that, you have our sympathies. It's, in my mind as a fan, I go through the emotions of being sympathetic to being downright angry because in my opinion, entertainment, you hear the show and what we do every episode, we do this. It's embracing entertainment mediums like comics and film and everything related to this as being our chance to escape from the stresses of life. It should never add to the stress of your life. It should never be used to put others in danger. People went to that midnight showing, and anytime anybody goes into a theater, goes anywhere, you go to that entertainment to get away from whatever is bothering you, to have that sense of camaraderie, to be there. I'm a big fan of movie theaters. I think the movie theater experience is something that it's a wonderful art form. I think I love seeing film at home. I have tons of movies here. I enjoy watching them here. But there's something about a movie theater experience that you can't capture at home. And it isn't just sitting with everybody else. It's the size of the screen. It's the sound system. It's just the whole... it's something that, as an institution in this country, I think it's something we need to protect and should be a part of. It's really sad that people go to... And there's people who dress up. At my showings, there are people who are dressed up. I loved seeing them have that opportunity to express themselves. I'm not a costume guy. I don't go, to conventions dressed up. And I'm not saying this to make myself sound like I'm holier than thou. It's just never been my thing. I am so impressed with the costumes that people make. I love seeing them. I'm the guy they dress up for, I think. They dress up, I think, to express themselves, but they also dress up to entertain others. I love taking pictures of people in cool costumes. I loved being at this Batman movie and seeing people come in the costumes. I'm not saying that in the sense I was looking down on anybody. If anything, they have my respect. It made my experience better because they were dressed up, because I really felt like I was a part of an atmosphere. To have that taken away from people was something, and that's really, it's not because of the film. It's not because there's violent video games. It's not because of any of that stuff. This person was troubled. And that's kind of pure and simple what happens in these type of situations. I shouldn't say it's simple. It's never simple. I don't know what this guy was going through. I don't know what would lead to somebody doing something like this, other than the fact that, just breaking it down, somebody has to be deeply troubled that they would take any entertainment medium, anything that was meant to be an escape, and use that against others. I'm really sad for any family, any person that was affected by this because they went through it, because I found this to be a deeply enjoyable experience. Fortunately, I was isolated from it. I didn't know about this, obviously, till the next day. And when I found out about it, I just felt so bad that anybody who was in that theater, anybody who lived in that area, anybody who read that story, they lost an opportunity to have the experience that I had. And that should never be taken away from somebody. Anything that's done as an art form is something that should be protected, and that people should get the opportunity to enjoy the way it was intended, not to feel like their life is in danger going to a movie theater. I mean, there's something really wrong that would happen. I'm throwing out my own personal emotional thoughts here. I'm not pretending I'm an expert on any of this, because I'm just clearly not. But just as a fan, I felt like this was something that affected so recently, and I felt like if we're going to have a big discussion about this film, I felt like we need to address it on some level. And again, apologies to anybody out there who is deeply affected by this. I don't know, is there anything you want to add? Or
I think you pretty much said it best there. This is a tough thing, and it's a very difficult subject, and it's a very painful subject. There are a lot of people affected by this, and thoughts and prayers are going out to anybody who is affected by this, and I think that's about it, man.
Ditto. No, ditto. That's perfect. That's perfect. Let's go back into the discussion of the film at this point. I felt like we should say something, because I felt like we'd be wrong if we didn't. I'm going to go a little bit chronological, because I think it's kind of cool to take a look at time progression, because this film dealt with a ton of time progression, and I thought it did it brilliantly. We see Talia as a little girl. Now, I didn't know it was that. I totally didn't catch that it was a little girl. I thought that was Bane too. When you watch it the second time and you see the Defender, I'm like sitting here, I'm like, how did I not realize that was Bane?
You know what, actually, I thought the Defender, I thought that was Ra's. I thought that was Ra's in there, and this was kind of a crazy training thing or something for Bane. I was thinking the whole, where we find out he was drummed out of the League of Shadows, was all just a setup. That everything from the beginning was a giant setup. that Bane was actually a true hardcore member of the League, and that was Raz, protecting his son, and just wanting the boy to find his path and fight. And I had all these thoughts going through my head, that this is Ra's al Ghul. This is all, and that's why they were hiding his face. That's why they're concealing it, because you didn't want to see Liam Neeson's face there. I was like, oh, that's brilliant. The whole time I'm thinking that, and I knew Talia was in the movie. I knew who Talia was. I knew, it just never clicked. I always thought that was Bane.
Yeah, it didn't click till my second watch through, and obviously when they did the reveal in the film, it was right there in your face. I love that this is something, if you go back to Batman Begins, when he's having that discussion with Bruce, talking about his loss of his great love, we got to see that play out here. This was It was not a throwaway in Batman Begins as a way to kind of just get us to know Ra's. We got to see what that was and how, why that was such a tragedy for him. Why he would enact this vengeance that he did on the prison when he went and after, his daughter got free, he went back and enacted the vengeance, and how he could never accept Bane because Bane was a reminder of that prison and that lost love of his.
Yeah.
And that was something that stuck with Talia until her father died, which is why we never... I love that in the storytelling I would explain. Why did we never see Talia before now? Well, she basically had kissed her father off because her protector, the guy who helped her survive and get out of that place, was excommunicated by her father. I loved that. I thought it was a great storytelling element. And, showed that why this Bane had been under the radar, why Bruce wouldn't have known him from League of Shadows. But it also, because of the fact that Bruce was a part of the League of Shadows and all that, there was a storytelling reason why Talia, Bane, would possibly know all along who Batman was. Mm-hmm. Because of that training and that connection. League of Shadows found a great way as a storytelling tool to show that Bruce's identity wouldn't have been secret from them. Without having to give us a ton of time in a film. I mean, you would think, well, it's a 2-hour, 45-minute film. They would have had time to reveal that in there. Not really. There was so much going on in that film. They needed a quick way to show us that felt real and made sense. And that League of Shadows connection, I thought, was a really good one. I like that became a part of Bruce's training in this storyline.
Oh, God, yeah. And one thing I liked, it was something I thought about afterwards when I was jotting down notes and jotting down some ideas, was the Joker. Mm-hmm. He was originally supposed to be in this story. And the only thing I can think of is he was supposed to be Bane. That the Joker was actually Talia's protector in the prison. And the scars on his face, that's how he got them, from that one doctor. Instead of the whole disfiguring of Bane, those two big broad scars across his face, would have been, the reason that kept that doctor in that prison. And as soon as I started thinking that really got me thinking about everything that we had in the second movie with the Joker, how he came to Gotham, one, wanting to make Bruce break his code. The code he wouldn't break for Ra's and the League of Shadows. The Joker was going to make him do it. Two, he was there to weaken Bruce, Batman, and set up for the fall of Gotham. Again, the continuation of Ra's al Ghul's, original plan. And I was just like, man, this would have been as equally an epic story to have told, a really cool swerve on the Joker and his origin.
I disagree with you. And the reason why I'm saying, first of all, I agree with you that everything you're saying there would be interesting. I don't think that was ever the original intention. I know the Joker was supposed to be in this. Now, I don't know what role the Joker was supposed to have in this. Part of me thinks where Jonathan Crane was where the Joker was supposed to be. Because Jonathan Crane was the judge.
Yeah.
In there, I thought that was where the Joker was supposed to be. I don't see any reason why you would put the Joker in the role of being Raz's, being a part of the League of Shadows and all that. I don't know. I don't see them going that route. Maybe you're right. Now, hang on. Let me finish because I'm not done. Hang on. I think what happened was, due to the death of Heath Ledger, that led to the third movie becoming drastically different than was originally intended. I would imagine that if the Joker was having a prominent role in the third movie, this movie that we're seeing right now, I don't know that Catwoman was originally intended to be a part of this film. So I'm guessing that whole, because it seemed like the Catwoman thing was something that he had to convince himself. When you read interviews with Christopher Nolan, that was something he had to convince himself that he wanted to do. And I think a lot of the Catwoman changes into this film came from the fact that the Joker wasn't going to be a part of it. I think that this script went a very, very different direction because of the death of Heath Ledger. I'm guessing. And I could be completely dead wrong on that. That's just my speculation. Go ahead. I know you wanted to add something back in.
Well, I was going to say, this is all complete speculation and just who knows what the actual thing. But I wasn't thinking Joker as a member of the League of Shadows. I was thinking how with Ra's not accepting him because of the whole thing with not accepting because of the scarring and the reminder, I was thinking Joker was never a part of the League. It was Joker and Talia doing their thing. That's why Joker just appears out of nowhere, because he and Talia were doing their own separate thing. Then when everything happens, that's when he shows up. So I wasn't thinking there wasn't going to be a connection to the League until the very end, when you learn who Talia is and all that.
I guess I don't see how you could take the Joker story and say all of a sudden he was in this deep, dark prison with Talia. It doesn't fit a Joker story to me. That just seems like reaching. I feel like this story was changed drastically because of the fact that they decided to go with Bane and Talia instead of whatever direction they were going to go with the Joker. I think the Joker's direction was going to be completely different. I mean, I just can't see how this would lead to that. I don't know if Bane was originally intended all along or not. That may have been something that was intended all along. I don't know how far the Bane process was. I know Catwoman was not always intended.
Right, yeah. And I don't know. I think it would be kind of cool, but as I say that, I absolutely loved what we got, so I'm not going to knock anything. Cause,
I think your idea is cool. I just don't see that. I don't see that was the original, because the way you were presenting that was like that was the original plan, and I just don't see that as being the original plan. I'm not saying the idea isn't cool. When you were telling it and you were saying it through, I'm like, well, that sounds like a cool idea. I just don't agree that was the original plan. So I'm agreeing with you in your coolness of your speculation. I just don't agree that was the original plan. I think that the plan changed drastically with Heath Ledger's death. I don't know if Bane was originally intended, but I do think that Bane, the storyline was crafted around Bane being the villain, this script. And I do think, drastic changes went in due to Catwoman, and I don't know if Talia's role somehow changed because of, Heath Ledger's. I'm guessing this script is very, very different than what was originally intended, because there's a lot of speculation on what villains were going to be in this piece. And I'm guessing that the storyline changed drastically because of Heath Ledger's death.
Probably. Oh, definitely, probably.
I did like the Scarecrow appearance. Seeing as we were in there, I thought that was really a cool use for him to have Crane in that role. It was neat to see him there.
So you know what? He's actually that was one of the things that I liked, the fact that he had made appearance in all the movies, and he was throughout all of them, and it was a continuation of the classic Batman. The villains don't act; he doesn't kill his villains. And you see a recurring, you see a continuation. And in this movie, the thing I liked about him was he wasn't wearing the Scarecrow mask. He wasn't doing the fear gas. He was still his craziness, but it was Jonathan Crane sitting up there. And they were calling him Crane, not Scarecrow. And I liked that distinction of, how the character, I want to say, grew a little bit, but he didn't really. He was still the same crazy guy. He's still the same Scarecrow, but he didn't need to wear the mask to instill fear. He didn't need the fear gas to instill fear. He still was, and is and always shall be an agent of fear, and I like that.
I like the idea of climbing out of the prison and needing fear to do amazing things. Because you hear all the time about the adrenaline rushes that people get in life or death situations. You hear about people lifting trees off of people and moving cars and doing stuff like that. And I'm not making light of that. These are things that you really hear all the time about, these fantastical things that people do due to adrenaline rushes because there's a family member in danger or their life's in danger or something. Stuff that they would not normally be able to do. I'm not saying like they're the Hulk and they pick things, a car up in a Buick and throw it across a lawn or something. But I mean, being able to lift a tire off of somebody or something, in that situation when a whole car's pressing down on somebody. You hear about these things all the time. It would make sense in this prison situation where you've got this kid who did, she had this only one chance. Bane gave her this opportunity, this doorway. She climbed out, and through that, made that leap. It also adds this whole mentality. This is then a type of person who could build themselves to the point where she could do what she's done in Gotham and set up this whole string of events. Could set up parties that would put players into places where they could do things that she wanted them to do. Could set herself up in a business position where she could be the key person to not only get a hold of new technology, but to understand all of the inner workings. while at the same time protecting that identity, the way that she learned from her father. So that way, if at any point in time any element of it goes wrong, she has not been compromised, and she can change, adapt, and improvise to overcome whatever that situation is, making her the perfect adversary for Batman in this, which was, I thought, really, really great. It's Bane. I thought the casting was terrific. I thought the storyline with Bane was terrific. I think Talia is somebody, if you think back logically, everything that she was doing behind the scenes, she was also a heavy player in all of this, and it's not really as apparent, which I think is the brilliant part of the script, because sometimes you need that player who behind the scenes is the puppet master. Talia was a puppet master in all this. I loved it.
Oh, God, yeah, and it's so perfectly fit her, and just one modern storytelling, and just the general, just complete, take the concept of the Bat universe out and just make this a normal movie where you have your main villain is secretively hiding in plain sight. And those are some of the greatest movie swerves that you can have. And as I said, even for me, a comic book fan who knew that was Talia, I knew 100% that was Talia. I knew 100% all the little puppet master manipulation stuff she was doing throughout from the beginning, up until that final swerve. I was like, yes, I knew, but even I was still surprised with some levels of it. He was able to take this, you have this very obvious, quote unquote, obvious swerve that this is Talia. She's really not who she says. She's really the bad guy. But then there was a whole nother level on it when they kept hiding the fact that she was in the prison. Because, my knowledge of Talia, she was never in the prison. Now, Bane was the person who escaped from prison. So I'm going into this with the comic book mentality, that must be Bane in the prison.
Now, here's my question to you. You walked in knowing she was Talia?
Yeah.
Because she wasn't billed as Talia. So how did you know she was Talia?
On IMDb, has her listed as Talia.
Oh, see, I didn't look at any of that. I walked into this film. I deliberately avoided the internet or anything relating to this film, other than the only thing I did watch, every trailer that came out, I watched the trailers. Now, there had been internet speculation that this girl might be Talia, but that was something that was speculation. It was never identified. So I didn't prior to going into the film, I didn't look on IMDb to see who was cast as who or anything like that. I walked in clean. So I didn't know she was Talia until she actually stabbed him. And I'm like, that's actually Talia. That's when I knew. Because I won't say that I 100% didn't know. There was rumors of that ever since her casting. But it was I never read anything that completely spelled her out. So I walked into that film the first time through not knowing 100% that was Talia. So when they were doing Bane's story, I'm like, they're going, the whole route that he's Raz's son and all that. I'm like, wow, that's an interesting twist. And so I was thinking to myself, like, well, how do I feel about that? Obviously, I didn't have long to think about how I felt about that because then the reveal came through. But it was cool that way. I think it's interesting that you walked in knowing that she was Talia. So the first time through watching that film had to have been for you very different than it was for me because I didn't know that she was Talia. I was looking to see if there was going to be that reveal, especially when the two of them got together and, Bruce and Talia got together and had that romantic moment. I'm wondering if she's going to eventually be revealed to be Talia or not. It was interesting. So we walked in with a different experience there.
And when I say I knew she was Talia, every time they marked down, they had the words rumored next to it. But when I saw her, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So I had that. It wasn't 100% confirmed because they can't confirm it.
Dude, I went to IMDb right here. She's listed as Miranda. Where are you reading that she was listed as Talia?
One of the times that I went to IMDb, they had her or some female listed as Talia.
Okay. Wow. I knew that's been a rumor all along, all the way through it. So it's not something the internet has rumored that. I did try to stay away from any potential spoilers. It was funny. We were at the line because of the marathon. We were at the line for snacks and stuff, and one of the things that they mentioned in that line, one of the kids said that, I know all the spoilers and stuff. He said, do you want to know any of them? And I said, don't tell me anything. And I said, I don't want to ruin any of it before I go in and actually enjoy the film. Then afterwards you have the geeky discussions like this. That's interesting that you knew that or that you were convinced going in. I did have that in the back of my head, but I wasn't totally thinking that.
And part of the thing I was thinking, also, again, maybe it wasn't IMDb I saw it on, maybe it was some other site, but I know there was a site that had listed Talia being in the movie. So I had going in my head that Talia was going to be one of the characters, and she's the main female that was there. And I'm looking at just how she's going, and then especially the environmental side of her and all this. I'm like, she fits Talia. One, a physical look to her. Two, just that style. And I just started seeing how she was always playing herself, putting herself in a position that would, make her, this is a Talia move. And that's part of the whole thing. So that's why when I was going on through this, I was convinced that was Talia from the beginning. But as I said, I thought it was a brother-sister thing. I didn't think that Bane was the protector, and I actually thought that was Bane who got out of the prison and everything. So when that swerve and that reveal came to me, I was just as shocked and surprised as you were, and I'm like, what? Oh, that is awesome. And I was just as, even though I knew who that was, I knew what was going on, but they still put that doubt in your mind. It's like with the death of Bruce. I was convinced 100% he was going to die. And, when you get that final reveal, you're like, yay! So it's just, that's something a story can do. They can take something that you, quote unquote, know for certain, and the entire time you're going on and going on, when you finally get that boom, that pop moment, you're still surprised. You're still excited about it. And that's good storytelling. It's, you think back to Death of Superman. The story was called Death of Superman. You knew Superman was going to die. And still, when he dies, I was still shocked. I was still like, oh, man. Oh, wow. And it was still a powerful moment. And just the process of getting to that moment was just this great story, this great epic adventure. Same thing with this. I had, you kind of thought where things were going to go, and you still had this process going through. And it wasn't until the final reveal, that final moment when you're like, yes, this is a story being told to me.
Now, it was funny. You were talking about, your thoughts on Talia. I did walk in thinking there was a possibility she was going to be revealed to be Talia. But I thought she was going to, in some way, be the reason why Bruce was able to come back. I thought that she was going to be on his side. Like when they became lovers during that one part, I'm like, well, if she turns out to be Talia, maybe she'll be the one that helps him get back on his feet, that helps him, come back and win. I didn't see her as being potentially the enemy. And as it went on and on further and further, I'm like, okay, maybe she's not Talia because, they're really pushing this role of her as Miranda. Obviously she isn't helping Bruce to come back, that he's doing that through the people in the prison. So I didn't end up going that route. So it was an interesting journey with that character. I thought it was, any way you looked at it, I thought the character was brilliantly played. I thought her casting was top notch, because I'm with you in the sense that she definitely has a presence that feels like Talia.
Oh, big time.
Now
that was I tell you, and as we're saying casting, because you mentioned before with Bane, I was one of the naysayers on Bane. I'll fully admit that when I saw who was casted, I'm like, really? I don't know about that. Now I'm like, I want to hop in the time machine, find that person, smack him in the face, say, you idiot. This is a great casting of Bane. This was an all-out, boom, boom, boom. We're seeing every character that they're picking, every actor they're picking to play these characters was just spot-on casting. And I was like, wow, that's something for 3 solid movies that they had down pat and correct. I was impressed and amazed.
Anne Hathaway was terrific as Catwoman.
Oh my God, she had just the characterizations, the mannerisms, just everything behind what I think of when I think of Catwoman and when I think of Selena Kyle. She had it down pat, and there were so many times the laugh out loud moments that I was getting from her, and just the yay kind of geeky, geek out moments with her and Holly. I was just like, this is just outstanding.
Talking about time progression and all this, in the beginning of the film, you get to see a younger Gordon, again, reinforcing the lie about Harvey Dent, the lie that he and Bruce had crafted. And then we do see shortly after that, again in the film, another anniversary where Jim Gordon's ready at this point to reveal the truth. It's a much older Jim Gordon. He's held this secret for such a long time, and he feels Gotham's at a point where, hey, I got to tell you what's going on. It's weighed on him too much. He basically took the Batman legend, the real hero of his story, and thrown him under the bus. But besides that, he's also thrown under the bus his own sense of justice, because he's made a hero out of a man who almost killed his kid, who, did all these horrible things, Harvey Dent, when he fell. And that was an interesting point where Gordon needed to eventually purge his soul. Ends up backfiring.
Yeah, kind of big time backfire. And when the movie starts off, and it's 8 years since the last movie, that was something that kind of threw me initially, especially when we see Bruce is all banged up. And I was just like, okay, is this just a cover, or what happened? And part of me was wondering if we already had the first Batman versus Bane fight, and that's why Bruce is all messed up.
Dude, hold it, stop. Go back and watch the end of Dark Knight again, and you'll see exactly how he wound up that way. Watch the end of Dark Knight again. Watch everything he went through with Harvey Dent. Watch him get shot. Watch him fall from that building. Watch the way he's limping when he goes to leave. All that happened to him during Dark Knight.
I know that now, especially when he goes to the doctor and he starts just listing all the things that's wrong with him. But it was kind of a cool thing where in the movie where, we get that reveal later on. I get that understanding of where he was. That was something that, as I said, it was initially, and then as the movie, goes on, the movie explains it. Now, it's kind of cool that you can actually see the banged up and the ending fight with Harvey and how that did it, because, to be honest, I didn't remember that. I knew he was through a lot of tough stuff, but it's Batman tough. He always can deal with it, and he always bounces back. So that thought didn't enter my head, but they had that one medical scene. And it was a multiple medical scene where, one, it was showing why Bruce is banged up, but it was also a chance for him to meet up with Gordon again. And I thought, again, that's one of the strengths of this movie, where they take the questions that that you have in the audience, that we have going through our heads, and they give you the answer. But not only do they it's not like a wasted scene just to appease the audience. There's extra stuff where it's, again, Gordon and Batman meeting up again, talking, laying down a game plan, and just, it was a cool kind of, returning, the two friends once again meeting up again, and he's needed again. It was a cool, multiple facet part of the story for me.
At the end of Dark Knight, though, there's that bit where Harvey, and just to paint the picture, because there might be other people who were in that, it was one of the advantages, I think, of seeing the marathon. Harvey has Batman at bay, Jim Gordon at bay, and Jim Gordon's family, and he's flipping coins. Flips it first on Batman, it lands on the scarred side, and he shoots him, which is part of the kidney issue that Batman had in Dark Knight Rises. Flips it again for himself, it lands up on the unscarred side, so he lives to fight another day. He goes to flip it for Gordon. He's got the sun in his hand still, Jim Gordon. Batman plows into him, catches the sun on the way down. He's holding himself on the side of the building, Batman is. Harvey's already fallen to his death. He hands the sun up to Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon grabs his son, Batman falls. That leads to a lot of the injuries that he wound up having in the beginning of Dark Knight Rises. This is years later, but he still has never fully recovered from all that. Because remember, Batman wasn't seen again after that whole...
Right, yeah.
So at the end of the movie Dark Knight, if you watch it again, as he's going to his bike, he's favoring the leg that he has to put the brace on in Dark Knight Rises. When he's going to the bike, when he's running, yes, but he's running, and it's obvious that he's doing everything in his power to use whatever parts of his body are still working to get himself to the bike so he can escape the situation. But he's clearly favoring the leg that's got the brace on it. So it's worth seeing these movies. And I guess what I'm saying to anybody here who did not go back and see the other films, do yourself a favor. Watch the first two, and then go see Dark Knight Rises again. It's really cool because it does all watch like one big film. You don't need anything else other than the first two films to see this as a complete story that was told. The time progression, what I loved in the beginning of this film with Jim Gordon, when you saw the younger Jim Gordon, he was honoring Harvey Dent like what you saw at the end of Dark Knight. But then you see that progression over time where he did it one more time, a little older. Then he did it again at Wayne Manor, much older then. So there was a time progression there. Then in the story, you see this thing with Bane, where Bane, does what he does in the plane, and we'll go back to that in a minute. But the other element used that I thought was brilliant for time progression. I want to make sure to note this now. The bomb. You've got a bomb that's set to go off in 5 months. And throughout the story, as things were happening, we got updates on the progress of the bomb, which was a cool device to give us as a viewer a sense that this movie spans many months. There was a 6-month span in the events of this film that was gradually played out through Bruce's time prior to this whole thing with the bomb, and then, the end result of how the film plays out. So it was a really, really cool, and then, who knows what time progression happened towards the end of the film there. But, it was a film that spans a considerable amount of time. And they use some really cool devices to give us a sense of that progression. You're not going to be able to pin it down to the day, but you pin down the sense that, wow, we went on a many-month journey with this whole storyline while we were watching it. I thought that was really great. Not even taking away the 8 years that had jumped at the beginning of the film. We also went on a 6-month journey, at least, in this film.
Well, I like the use of snow. Something as simple as snowfall, to really show progression of time. Because you have when Bane first makes his public appearance and seizes Gotham, it's right at the beginning of football season. So that's, that was probably in August, maybe a September game. Who knows? Probably not preseason, probably regular season. So you got then, and then a little bit later they show the tumblers going through and driving across snow-crossed streets and people sending out to walk out on the ice on the river. There was just thought that was again another great way to show a progression of time.
In the plane, we had that early first appearance of Bane, and I knew that was coming because I'd seen enough of the previews to know that eventually that hood was going to come off and Bane was there. But I certainly did not know how that played out. I love the FBI agent who's from Game of Thrones was was pretending to shoot them, in order to get them to talk. And I love that Bane, caught them right away. Why would you shoot somebody to throw them out of a plane? And the voice and the vocal tone, and I'm going to throw out a lot of themes here where I don't remember the exact lines that were used, but I've got to say I really loved Bane's confidence and that there was an intelligence to him. I think if you lose the intelligence to Bane, you miss what works with the character. Sure, he's not the Venom jacked up Bane. I'm fine with that. The important part to Bane, I think, was never just the Venom. There was a mind driving that beast. They still made him a beast in this. They did it in a way that works for the Batman Begins Dark Knight universe, and it works here. The Nolan-verse, really, this is a Bane in the Nolan-verse who's been trained in the League of Shadows. He's a monster and, just has that intense energy, and he's crafted that way because of a horrible life, which does go to Bane's core. Bane was in a hell of a prison. And that this really, the changes that were made with Bane really are very minimal when you really look at how the story played out. The Venom thing is a change, but, I like the idea that this mask is on his face to keep him from feeling all the pain that he went through after saving Talia, and that was before his training at the hands of Ra's.
Yeah.
So that was something that I thought was really, really great, that this is something, okay, storytelling-wise for the mask, it makes a whole bunch of sense. It works really well. And I loved how that plane thing, when the other plane came up and the 4 guys swooped down, it reminded me of what I loved about Nightfall. In Nightfall, leading up to it, because I read the stories leading up to Nightfall. I ended up liking Nightfall so much that I went up and got the issues that were leading up to it. It was one of the few times where, budget-wise, I was not reading all the Bat books. And it got me to go back at comic shops and get all of the issues leading up to it that I had missed. And, fortunately, it was at a time where you could do that at comic shops. And to see Bruce's state. Bruce was very much in the state that he's in the film thematically. This was a Batman who had been broken down. The Batman in Nightfall was broken down emotionally. This is a Batman that was broken down physically and emotionally in this film. So they did do that leading into it. On the flip side, we see a Bane and Talia, which we find out it was Talia too, who are crafting this plan to take down Gotham, which is what was happening during Nightfall in the comics. That plane, when they swooped down and they took, they ended up taking that scientist out of there, and I love that they used his blood as a way to mask the fact that he did die, he went down with the flight and all that, to take him off the grid so that way they could utilize him to make their plan come to fruition without anybody being worried that this nuclear physicist is still running around. That was brilliant. I loved how that played out, even to the point where the guard was so enamored by Bane, which totally fits being a part of the League of Shadows and Talia and, that whole world. Brother, you need to stay here because they're going to expect one of us to be in the wreckage. And the blind loyalty of the guy saying, okay, I'm here, we're rising, this is our chance. I was blown away by that. What a great tone to start off so early in the film. This sense of Bane being a leader, Bane being somebody who they would have confidence in. Now, when you watch it through a second time and you realize that Talia was there, and I don't know if you realized that the first time through, that Talia would have been involved with that whole scenario, and maybe you did, because it sounded like you were piecing out a lot of this as you were going on, which is a cool experience to do it the way that you did. And in my case, I was totally fixated on Bane being there. My second time through, I'm like, wow, and Talia was a part of that too. Every element of the planning, Talia was a part of all that and setting that whole thing up. And when we do eventually see her in the next sequences holding the party at Wayne Manor and being a part of that whole thing and then holding her own party later, she helps set up elements to put players in place, like Catwoman, to get the fingerprints, to, Daggett was used. Daggett's lackey was used. All of these people were used to put things into place. And in many ways, the Wayne board was used to put everything in place. It was just such a brilliantly laid out plan. I love the fact that you can rewatch a film and see it a different way. I loved your experience with how you saw it because you knew it was Talia going in, or you were really a lot more convinced early on that it was Talia, and that you were thinking Talia was more in on things. I was seeing Talia more if it turned out to be her, and that was where our tone was different. I was seeing Talia more as a good guy, so I wasn't thinking her. And so that the second viewing for me was drastically different than maybe for you it would be because you already saw her that way. But were you thinking it was her right from the beginning?
Well, here's the thing with me and that opening plane sequence. I had Talia in the back of my head, but I wasn't really anything forefront.
Okay.
That whole opening sequence, I'm completely agreeing with you. I was thinking Bane the entire time, and I knew one of the hooded prisoners had to be Bane, and as soon as I heard the voice, I'm like, okay, that one's Bane. You all are about to die. And just, how it played out, again, wonderful Bane moments. Completely, I'm sitting here as you're talking, I'm nodding my head, and it was neat because the voice of Bane from the promos and the previews and stuff, people were complaining about it, and they had to do some augmentation with some technical stuff because of the Bane mask, and I loved that sound in his voice. That kind of that confidence, that eerie confidence that he had. And one of the first villains that popped in my head when I heard it was Goldfinger from the Bond movies, especially that one scene, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die." That same type of just energy in, "I am about to kill you." There's nothing wrong with that. And it was just that same, it was like a pleasantry in your death and destruction, and a pleasantry in what I am doing and, where we are going with this. And it's that higher purpose villain, that villain who is doing the quote unquote right thing, but even though it's completely evil. So as that was going through, I was sitting there like, this is Bane. And right down to the planning, faking the scientist's death, and just his brother sticking around and saying, "No, brother, you must die." "Yes, sir." "Okay, no problem." Boom. Everything just kept reading Bane, Bane, Bane. And I was like, yeah, this is awesome. But it wasn't until Talia was in the reactor core, when Bruce and, took down, when Bruce and after Bruce had lost all his money, that I really 100% said, oh my God, she's been in from the very, very beginning. And that's when I really started piecing, everything together. I knew she was Talia. I knew something was wrong. I knew she was a bad guy, or I thought maybe she was a bad guy. I wasn't exactly sure where she was going to play. But when she made the reference to, and the only scientist who can do this is dead, I'm like, oh, crud, that's why they did it. That's why they, faked the death. And then everything just, I knew when Catwoman was breaking into the house, stealing the fingerprints, I'm like, okay, they're doing this to take out Bruce. I didn't think Talia set this up. I was thinking it was the lackey. But then once I saw Bane connection, I'm like, oh, this Bane's using this guy. And it was one of those things where I had Talia in my head, Talia in the back of my head, and I was thinking, yes, this is Talia. But the whole time I kept thinking Bane's the main villain. And I think that for me was, again, the great moment of the great swerve. From the great Talia swerve, that she was the puppet master behind all of this. She was the driving force, the principal agent behind all of this. And I knew she was the villain. I knew she was the bad guy, but I was so focused on Bane. It was like when we did the actual Bane, when we did the Nightfall story and all that, where everyone kept, everyone's thinking Bane's the villain. No, Bane's not the main villain. Ezreal was the main villain. Well, this is our version of that. It's not, it's not the exact same thing, but it is. This is the version of it where everyone's thinking Bane's the main villain. No, Bane's not the main villain. Talia was the main villain all along, and surprise. And I just, thought that was just a great part of this whole experience and this whole movie. And it's something built from episode 1, from the very first movie. The Al Ghul, the League of Shadows, just everything was getting laid down from the very beginning, played out through. And it was an experience that I'm like, this is how you do a trilogy. This is how you do a superhero movie. This is it. Boom, outstanding.
See, and I'm echoing everything you're saying. It's funny how you and I saw that whole sequence with Miranda different, because at that point she was still Miranda to me. She was not Talia. I was convinced that this was her and Bruce's plan. This is Bruce's ditch effort to try and stop Bane and Daggett from getting a hold of the core. Let's give it to her, hope that she's going to handle it right. I thought when Bane showed up in the second sequence with the boardroom, after Miranda had taken over and they went back up again, and Bane with Fox and the whole crew, and Bane was waiting there, I'm like, okay, Bane is showing up at the boardroom now because they forced his hand. Because of Miranda taking over. I hadn't thought Talia yet. I was still focused on Bane, and I was thinking of something like, this is clever, because now you're really showing just how powerful Bane is. He's taking control of the arsenal, taking control of the armory. Now you see Lucius just in awe of what this guy has discovered and what he's done. The intimidation in that moment of Miranda, and which turns out to be Talia, which was perfect with her because she swerved me the way she swerved Lucius and the other board members, saying, Lucius, you have to do this because you're only slowing him down a little bit. The other board members up there, if we kill you, they're going to come down here and they're going to put their hand down. So we might as well go ahead and do this. That was brilliant. It was so brilliantly played because the character swerved me there, too, because I was not thinking Talia there. And even if she did turn out to be Talia, I was still thinking to myself, in some strange, bizarre way, she's going to help Bruce. Because I'm thinking the beloved Talia, the one that, And I do think that this is still the same person that could have become that person. Just events played out a little differently in this world for her.
Well, the killing of the father, just that whole, introduction, the way Bruce, I think the killing of Ra's al Ghul was that was going to be a really bad way to start a relationship. Yeah, it's tough. You kill someone's father, they're not going to be completely trusting of you. It's not a good deal. It's a tough one. Even Bruce Wayne, with all his style and his smoothness, because he's a pretty smooth guy, that would be a tough one for him to work through.
I liked with Alfred when Bruce was getting back into the cowl, because the events that were going on, especially after he had, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character of John Blake, right? That character was terrific because it's this kid who was an orphan. He had the rage, he had the anger, and he recognized in Bruce something that he saw in himself. I loved that because it's funny, we've done a lot of talking lately about Tim Drake and what was cool about Tim Drake discovering who Batman was. I really like that this character discovered who Bruce was in a similar way. It was a connection. It was this detective used his skills and his hunches to figure out who this man really was. Recognizing how far things have gone, we need Batman right now. Look what happened to Jim Gordon. Look what's happening under the sewers. This is not something our police is going to be able to handle. We need Batman to handle this. And Bruce realizing just how out of touch he's been, taking care of the orphans and that money going to those purposes and finding out that, like, okay, I've been here isolating myself from the world because of how broken down I am, both physically and emotionally, because of events. I've got to come back out. I've got to do something again. What does he know how to do as an agent of change? He only knows how to do it as Batman. He doesn't know how to do it as Bruce Wayne. Yeah, I mean, and that's something that we see in the comics. He does make appearances as Bruce Wayne for information getting, for fact finding, for things like that. But it's all ultimately to further his goal as Batman, to further his needs as Batman. He always puts Bruce Wayne on the back burner. And we saw what happens and how far down Bruce goes in this, because instead of doing what Alfred said and focusing on helping Gotham as Bruce Wayne, he does it as Batman, and Bruce Wayne ultimately destroys himself.
Yeah.
I mean, that persona, I should say, and the whole Wayne thing. I thought it was great because you get to see that a lot of what Rachel said in the first film's true. Bruce Wayne is the mask. And this, I'm not saying that he doesn't put on a mask when he's Batman, because that voice, that, swear to me voice and all that stuff, that is his mask too. But it is that guy who is, when we saw him sitting down there working at the computer in the Batcave for the first time, which I geeked out when the piano played and we got to see the new Wayne Manor having that doorway and he went down there. That is the real him in those moments. And when we're having that conversation, I love that because I do think that's very true. I don't think Bruce Wayne has a duality. I think he has a three-front warfare going on. And the real guy is that third guy. Not 1 and 2, it's the third guy there.
Yeah, I tell you, that Blake character, for me, was just a great... he's a great Robin. Let's just call him who he is and what he was. And the thing I loved about it is he had like every aspect of the Robins. He had that detective side of Tim. He had the Jason upbringing, and he had a very Dick Grayson style to him and presence to him, and just that, always look to the light, always that hope and fighting for hope, and just that positive energy that Grayson always had as Robin, as Nightwing, as Dick Grayson. And I thought that was a cool meshing and melding of those characters into the one aspect. And they never officially made him a quote-unquote formal Robin. He's more the next Batman or next whatever he's going to be. He would be in this individual universe. But he was, again, a great eyes into why Batman needs his Robin, why Batman needs that person. And, he wasn't just an agent to get Bruce back in the game. He was that agent for strength, for that agent for positive characters. Even Gordon, when the big reveal of Gordon, comes out, he's right there at Gordon saying, "Hey, how could you lie about this? How could you keep this? How could you throw Batman under the bus like you did?" And he was right there at Gordon's face. He didn't let it go. And throughout the movie, he always had that, that kind of that element that needs to be in the Bat stories, that energy, that the force, the fight for truth, the fight for justice, the fight for what is right. And that is, I was just like, dang, that is such a cool way to have it in the movie. That's he was always kind of the conscience of the different characters that he was around, and I thought that was a great brand new character, a great usage of the concept, and a great usage of him within the PD.
I love that we've invented a word for when you put all the Robins together. We call it a melding. I knew what you were going for. You're going for melding. But that was really funny. I'm like, I actually kind of like that. So that from now on is going to be our new word. Whenever we put too many Robins into one character, we're going to say it's a melding.
Hey, we can have meldings of Green Lanterns as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you start combining different Green Lanterns.
That's right. So it can be a multi-hero thing. In the New 52, there's a lot of meldings going on.
Oh, big time.
I agree with your absolutely every word you were saying about the character. I thought he was great. And I love that he did take on kind of the Robin role. I think what they were doing with him was, instead of having a Robin in this, because I read a couple reviews afterwards where people were saying, well, Nolan kind of went against what he originally said and he put a Robin in this. See, I think they used his given name being Robin just as a nod to the Robin concept. But see, I don't look at him as being a Robin. I actually, if anything, I look at him more as being a Batman Beyond. Where in the sense, and I'm not, and let me go again. I want to say everything you said about seeing elements of all the Robins in him, I agree with you. I thought he definitely had that. I mean, I referenced Tim Drake right away because I thought that was an element there. So you're 100% spot on. But I think what Nolan was showing here was Bruce, in the end, decided that Batman needed to be a symbol. That was what his goal was from the beginning. And the symbol was meant to live on beyond him. It was meant to be something, he said, as a man, I can be killed. As a symbol, I can go beyond that, that whole feeling. And I know I'm misquoting it. I'm just throwing out the idea, the concept that was there. I always loved that about these films, that idea of creating Batman as a symbol, as something to shock people into action, I think the whole idea in my eyes about Batman was a change that would prevent anybody from going through what Bruce went through. To try and prevent that from happening to others. I love that that's being brought into this. And I think that was something that was really a terrific part of the film. And that's what Blake's role is. But I do look at him as being Batman Beyond in the sense that at the end when we see him in the Batcave, he's not taking on the Robin role. He would become Batman. And Batman would continue after Bruce is no more. Bruce is left now. Bruce is dead in the eyes of most in Gotham. About 95% of Gotham. I would say Fox.
99% of Gotham.
I would say Fox and Alfred know that he's still alive.
Yeah, well, Fox and Alfred know he's alive, and I'm thinking Blake may suspect it. Just because everything that was left to him with the coordinates and just how everything was laid out for him to continue on with the mission, knowing he would continue on. Now, that could be just a final farewell, knowing you're going to continue on after I'm gone. So maybe not, but part of me just thinks that Blake knows Bruce is still alive. And there's no real evidence to suggest this. It's just a hunch I have towards the character.
Sure. And, I mean, I could see that being the case as well.
Yeah. Now, one of the things, though, I will say is it was funny because I immediately call him Robin, and I, said he has the characterizations of Robins, but I never thought he would continue on as Robin. I thought if they were ever to continue on this universe, he would adopt the name Nightwing. And he wouldn't call himself Batman because there's only one Batman. Mm-hmm. But I could see him doing a Nightwing or doing something like that because he wouldn't want to take away from who was the Bat. But again, you could very easily argue, and I'm not even going to fight you on the argument, that he would want to continue on the role of Batman because Gotham needs its Batman. Gotham needs that figure, and it's not just one man that is Batman. It's whoever is the inspired and who will stand up and rise up for the higher cause, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as I'm saying Nightwing, I'm also saying he could very easily put on the cowl and call himself Batman. So it's a weird moments that I have when I think about the moments beyond the movie. When I start thinking, what happens to this universe as it continues on.
See, to me, I always saw him as becoming Batman because Gordon repaired the light and put it up there. And I guess what I'm saying is this film has stressed so much the symbol of Batman. Even when Bruce shows up again to save, after Gordon and all of them were exiled as their way of death, when the flare's there and the symbol lights up and it shocks, again, that one, Matthew Modine, shocks him back into action. I think that idea of the symbol of Batman, I mean, obviously people would know that Batman died because there's been the statue and honoring him and all that, but, Batman dies only to rise again when Gotham needs him, I think would be the concept that goes there. I don't know. I don't have any issue with what you were saying about him being a Nightwing. In my mind, though, I think with what Bruce intended in the first film, it would be that he would take on the role of Batman. So the symbol of Batman lives on. Versus, I agree with you 100%. He wouldn't become Robin. That makes no sense. I don't know where, he wouldn't all of a sudden start. I got a great idea. Incognito, let me use my given name. Why would I do that?
That was definitely a nod to the character. And the one thing I was wondering, and with the bat symbol being repaired, did Jim Gordon do that, or did Bruce do that? Was that Bruce's way of letting Gordon know, I'm still alive? Boom, here. And that was just kind of the, Bruce doing that before he disappeared, or sneaking back in because he's Bruce Wayne. He can do that kind of stuff.
I like not knowing.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the, I mean, first of all, sure, that's a possibility. The question is, did Jim Gordon know all along? Then the other part of me wonders, did Jim Gordon then figure that maybe this guy dropped off the police force because he's going to take that role now? I don't know. There's so many different ways of speculating on that whole thing. What I love about it is I like that the story had a definitive ending, but like every good film, there's threads that are left there that are open to interpretation. And I think that's needed. You don't need every fine detail. The main story ended, and we're given all the information that we need there.
Can Batman escape? One hint, the worst is yet to come.
Jim, one of the things I want to discuss in this series is the combat sequences, particularly Bane and Batman in this one. It's funny how, as the movie series has evolved from Batman Begins, there's been more mobility to the Batman costume. And it's really helped fight sequences like the one when, he for the first time we see him underground fighting Bane. Catwoman has just locked him in. And you've got this great visual of him throwing these hard punches, but Bane many times dodging, catching them, and sometimes out and out taking them. But coming back with punches, it felt like something out of Rocky IV.
Yes.
I kept remembering with Drago, when you saw Drago in Rocky IV, in his training sequences, he was punching, and you'd see these high, intense numbers that Rocky could never reach because of what was happening with him with his drug training and all that stuff that he was doing. I felt like Bane was very much that type of role. You saw Batman just continuing to fight on regardless. But what I loved with Catwoman, and why I keep referring to her, they really did a great job of shooting back to her periodically. And you saw from her visual watching this how troubled she was. That added to the intensity of just what Bane was doing when he was hitting Batman, because she had a lot of regret in those moments. And I liked that because it showed a side to her that I thought was really important to develop here, because I don't think if you don't see that developed during the film, you don't care when they eventually wind up together at the end. And that's one of the things about great storytelling in this, was we learned a lot from her, not only from her actions, but sometimes just her reactions to sequences. And I thought she was terrific in that. But the combat was stellar. Not just when he picked him up and broke, his back, or, knocked out the vertebrae, or however you want to look at that sequence. Not just from then. The actual build. I loved that he didn't start breaking the cowl until towards the end of the fight. Yeah. Right before, he exploded, the top sequence of the building. I wondered what would break first, your body or your soul. Such a great sequence. Everything he was saying to him, even throwing back lines that Ra's was using in the first film about using theatricality, but, saying, hey, I'm from the League of Shadows. People like us, we aren't going to be fooled by that. And the whole darkness thing, using darkness as your ally. I was born in darkness. That whole sequence, I thought it was the fighting, the punching, the atmosphere, the tone, the mood. There was a lot of development of a villain there, which I thought was really, really great. It put Bane up in a very, very high spot as being someone not only physically, but psychologically able to be, take on Batman and take him down.
Oh, God, yeah. This was, one of those, probably, I would say one of, if not my favorite fight sequences of movie history. Just, one of the things I digged about it is they minimized the music soundtrack. They left the natural, normal, quote-unquote, normal combat sounds that you get from the punches and the yells and just the background sequences as he's being thrown around and the crashing. Just that natural chaos and anarchy that comes in violence, that comes in fighting. When you get down and dirty and you just get just knuckles deep in just a true fight, there's something beyond just... There is its own music to it. There is its own pageantry to it, and it's in a way it's that creepy, weird coolness that you can get from violence and you can get from destruction. And I loved how they really captured that. This wasn't just about this really muscular, powerful, drugged-up villain. This was about two forces of nature colliding, and this was a battle of epic proportions that, for me, was just a whoa moment as it was going on. Again, I physically sat up and I was leaning into the in the seats, and I was sitting there. I was like, oh my God, eyes were probably as big as saucers. I was like a little kid again, just reveling in what I was seeing. This was, you make reference to Rocky, and Drago, which had that, kind of moments for me, but there's something more natural, more realistic about this fight sequence. And it's weird to say realistic when you're dealing with, Batman, and you're dealing with Bane, and you're dealing with all these different comic book elements of the story. But for me, there was a realism to this fight scene. This was two guys duking it out. This was two men fighting. And this was, you talk about all the psychological warfare. Amen, amen, amen. Normally, that's Batman's motif. He is the element agent of fear. He is just this criminals are a cowardly and superstitious lot. Well, guess what? He's now dealing with someone who has the same knowledge, the same training. Fear isn't going to work on this guy. He's got to get nasty. And it led me back to those moments with him and Alfred. When Alfred's like, this guy is like nothing you've ever faced. He's like, well, then I'll just be fiercer. I'll just fight harder. Like, no, it's not about fighting harder, because there is a level that Bane is at that you're just not at. And I loved seeing how he kept trying to rage. He kept trying to fight back. And even, he was throwing out just those desperation yells as he's swinging with everything he's got. He was throwing haymakers. He was just throwing those wide, hard punches with every single thing he had on it. Those aren't the most technically sound or efficient fighting style, but that's that desperation, that last ditch. This is everything I have in my body. I am throwing it into this punch now. And I loved seeing that, because it brought me back to the comic book fight. That first fight between Batman and Bruce, where Bane just completely destroys him. Again, you see, though, this type of, it was that same type of fighting, but it was personalized for this movie. It wasn't exactly what I saw there. It was different. It was underground. It was right underneath where, the war room, where all the, where R&D is located. And that, again, I never saw that coming. Complete full-on swerve. I was like, I kind of saw the Catwoman betrayal. That wasn't a huge surprise for me, but right underneath R&D, that was a huge swerve. Right after this epic fight, we see that. I'm like, oh my God, this is just a beautiful, beautiful layout of events.
Yeah, but it is like what they did in Nightfall. He was taking the battle to Batman's home.
Yeah.
In this case, he used the arsenal, because Batman's arsenal would be the way that he would get a hold of it. But instead of going to the Batcave for it, he went to the place where he would get more of the arsenal. It's funny. You were talking about how Bruce was screaming and raging. I will say, though, that this is still a diminished Bruce. I'm not talking about physically diminished. I think Alfred was 100% right when he was saying that, your mental state, there's that part of you that almost wants to fail, in the sense that Bruce wants it to end. He isn't at that place. This was something that he went through, and I think that's where our reading of Nightfall was a bit different. Leading up to Nightfall, he was in that troubled place. He wasn't the same driven man that he was, in this case of this Batman, in the first two films. We psychologically have seen a Bruce who is very much torn and diminished, and Bane isn't. Bane is 100% psychologically in the right frame of mind in that battle, where Bruce isn't all there. He does lash out in desperation, very similar to what he did in Nightfall. There were moments where he threw things at Bane that just were not going to do any damage, even though he was throwing everything that he had at that time. I liked that. I liked that we saw that it wasn't just a physical problem that he was having. He was also not mentally 100% in the game, and that Alfred noticed it, to the point where Alfred left. Now, Alfred leaving is something that did happen in Batman history. Alfred left him for very similar reasons during the Nightfall storylines, during Knight's Quest, but it was because he'd gotten to the point where, very similar to this, he said to him, I can't watch you die. I can't, keep watching you do this to yourself. It's too much at this point. It's a very similar, situation where he left to try and shock him, to take better care of himself, to save himself, to think of himself, to protect himself. And so that plays out very similarly to how it played out in the comics, theme and tone-wise. I remember when we talked about Nightfall, you asked how that played out. This actually was really really close.
Oh, cool.
I mean, obviously Rachel Dawes wasn't a part of that, and it wasn't, over that situation. But the idea and the concept behind Alfred making the stand when he did was not because he wanted to abandon Bruce. It was out of love and hoping that his leaving would wake him up and somehow get him to realize, what was really important and what might lead to a better life for him. I liked that. I liked how that played out when it did. I liked Bruce's reaction the next morning when he didn't know Alfred. He's like, Alfred, are you going to get the door, buddy? And just doesn't really acknowledge that he isn't there. It shows how Bruce almost had walked away from that discussion afterwards, and Alfred was gone. It was interesting. I'm not saying that the discussion didn't resonate with Bruce, but I'm talking about the idea that Alfred, I don't think he took it seriously that Alfred really was going to leave.
No, and I thought that was some kind of interesting moments in the movie that, Alfred would do that. And again, difference between your experience and my experience with the Bat universe. I've never seen Alfred walk away. I've never seen Alfred do it. And that was something in the back of my mind, I always think about, with the Batman, with the Bruce Wayne and Alfred relationship, part of me always does say, Alfred, you're an enabler. This is a crazy man, and you are his enabler. If you weren't around, would he continue on this destructive path? And I liked seeing that in the movie. I like that concept being explored and being, brought up and actually acted upon. That, it's you call it tough love, you call it whatever you want to call it, but that is the hardest thing for anybody to do, that he would actually walk away hoping that would be the one thing that could shock him back, that could bring back Bruce Wayne. Not bring back Batman, bring back Bruce Wayne. Give Bruce that fight to live, that that reason to continue on. I loved just when he was talking about when Bruce was gone the first time, and how he would go on holiday, and he would always hope that he would see Bruce just living a happy life, and just continuing on, and everything would be great. And I kind of like that, that dream and that wish that he would have, because that right there is I want to say that's a true parent,
yes.
wish.
And the funny part is, I don't think there is a bringing back. I think very much Rachel said it the best in the first film about the masks. I think the guy who is under the cowl, the guy who wears the cowl is Bruce Wayne. I don't think Bruce Wayne is the guy that he puts on his public persona at all. And I think that's the part Alfred was trying to figure out how to help him resolve and allow himself and want himself to live and to have a better life. And I loved that he revealed what he did with Rachel Dawes. I want to correct myself on one thing. I said that I don't think Bruce took him seriously, and I'm going to correct that. I do think Bruce did. Because when he said goodbye, Alfred, in that moment, the power and the emotion in his face there, and Alfred knew that he took him seriously, he did. I think what happened was when he said, Alfred, it's force of habit. The door, goes in and does that out of force of habit. It's familiarity of doing that. Not so much they didn't take him seriously. So I want to correct myself there, because that isn't right. And that isn't really what I'm thinking. Because that moment, you can't argue the power in that moment with those two. When he said goodbye, Alfred, he meant goodbye. I mean, there was no gray area there. Yeah. He knew that he was going in that moment. And I thought that was really terrifically handled. Then we go to this...
the scene with the keys, where he doesn't have keys to his own house. He's lived his life a certain way, and he's so used to that. So that's why the Alfred was the first reaction. That's just what he does.
It's when we're looking at the sequence after he's broken by Bane, and he's put into that prison. I love that after Bane took the mask and kind of was walking away for it and like chucked it down, we saw two of his thugs come up. It was the only time we saw the thugs get involved at all. They start dragging him behind Bane. And then we see him taken to the prison very quickly. And one thing I loved is they showed when they were every time they had to drag him, he was not able to walk himself. It builds this sense of, wow, when he dropped him over that knee, I mean, we did some major damage here. To the point where this guy is not getting up. This guy is not walking again on his own without some help at this point. I liked when we saw the feet being dragged, after he took him out of the bat outfit and threw him in the prison. We saw the feet being dragged behind, again, adding this sense of the breaking. And then in the prison, why did you let me live? Why didn't you kill me? And, he wanted to die. Bane knew that. You want to die, but that's not a severe enough punishment for you. I want you to see everything that you wished for, everything that you hoped for, every possible thing that you did to try and save Gotham combust. And then after, because that's the funny part, they could have blown up Gotham right away. It wasn't about blowing up Gotham right away. There was a vengeance being brought down because of what happened with Ra's al Ghul. They brought vengeance to Gotham. Because if it really was about, just Gotham needed to be wiped clean so they could start off new and fresh there, they would have blown it up right away. They wanted deliberately to wait almost 5 months to let Gotham blow up to make a statement with what they were doing in Gotham. And then they were going to blow it up anyway. I mean, there was no saving of Gotham. Regardless, the end result was going to be the same if they blew it up right away or blew it up 5 months later. Instead, they were making a social statement with what they were doing. And also a statement of revenge, because they wanted Bruce to suffer. The man who killed Ra's, they wanted to torture him with Gotham. What a thing to do.
Oh my God, yeah, that was the thing that was resonating for me when I said earlier in the beginning how they didn't follow the comic book character Bane, but they followed his core and his being. And one of the biggest things was the intelligence side of him, the multifaceted attack side of Bane. Bane just doesn't come at you from the front. Bane's going to hit you from the sides. Bane's going to hit you from above and beyond, and then below and all around you at the same time. And then while he's doing that, he's going to mess with your mind a little bit. Right here, we saw just that intelligence, that viciousness, that level beyond any other villain that Batman had faced before in Bane, and that he would do this to him. And it was a really cool thing because when I was seeing, I saw a couple promos and saw that stuff where Bruce was beaten. I saw the one promo where he says, "Why didn't you kill me?" And just that whole sequence. And I was actually thinking when the movie started 8 years after, it was after all that stuff was going to happen, and that was going to be a flashback sequence. Going into the movie, I didn't think that was going to be actually played out in real time in the movie. And so when I'm actually experiencing, I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then you talk about the 5-month trigger on the bomb. I'm like, this is just a great laid out idea to allow this evolution, this growth, this, time spent for Bruce in this prison and allow for it all to play out and happen. And again, it was the Bane story. This was, because that Bane story was such an epic growth, and it wasn't about just the breaking of Batman. It was about the return of Bruce. And you have those cool sequences where he was rebuilding and he was training and coming back, and those Lady Shiva moments that he had. This was that version of the Lady Shiva moments. And yes. I love just how that came out. This was a really crucial part of the story that I was so glad we got.
You needed Bruce to come back mentally as well as physically better than he was before. I think he was defeated by Bane not just physically but mentally. And there's a distinction there. In that round one fight, it wasn't just a physical beating. Bruce was mentally not ready to face him. And Alfred saw it. Now, I don't know that Alfred would have had the same discussion with the Batman that came back. The guy that climbed out of that pit is not a guy that's going to go down to Bane, because Bane couldn't do that. And I love that it turns out in the end that Bruce was able to do something Bane couldn't when he climbed out of that.
Yeah.
Which is a different twist as well. When you see that at the end, you're like, oh my God, Bane couldn't do that. Bruce did. And I think it put Bruce in a place where he could defeat him. We got an email from Kent Hare, and I don't usually do emails on the show, but these are directly related to Dark Knight Rises, and there's some things that he was talking about. He also noticed the inspiration possibly of the Bane-Talia relationship being Secret Six's Bane and Scandal. But he was questioning a possible plot hole. And he said, how did Bane know what was on the paper that Gordon slipped into his coat pocket? Did he know, or was he just fishing? Because I was looking at that as I didn't think Bane knew. I think what happened was when Gordon was captured, naturally you would search the pockets and things like that for anything that you could use. That happened to be bulging right there. Because, that speech was multiple pages. So I didn't take that as he knew what was on the paper. I took it as, because he read the paper immediately, and that was how he knew it was on it. Because you even see him when Bane first grabs it, he opens it up right away and starts reading it. So that was how he realized what Gordon's secret was, not because Gordon had slipped up somewhere earlier. So Bane didn't know.
Right.
Did you take it the same way?
Oh, definitely, exactly. Because when you take somebody captive, first thing you do is you want to gather any intelligence you can from them. So you rifle the pockets, you search for something, and that letter was, that speech was a big bulging thing right there. It was like, hey, what's this? That drew attention immediately, and I noticed that, and I was like, I wonder what he was actually going to say, because when he first goes to read, he goes, maybe another time. I'm like, and because I was kind of thinking he was going to admit the truth, behind it, but, held back. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool how that, comes out and that plays out in the end.
And the bit with he asked about the bit with the IV in the airplane hijacking, and that was so his blood would be at the crash site.
Yeah, it's DNA evidence.
Right.
You had to, that's after the way that destruction and everything was going to go down, they would use that, for testing.
Right. So it was just a way for that scientist to be dead to the world, and that was how that all came about. So it was interesting. Now, one of the things I liked in that training montage with Bruce, too, was you saw, first of all, what would motivate him to want to walk again, obviously, instead of dying, which is what he really wanted to do. His rage built up, his anger built up, and you saw him. I liked how the guy was a medical doctor there and said that in order for you to get out of here, we've got to first get you walking, and the sheer pain he went through to do that. Then the vision from Roz, which I thought was terrific, where Bruce started putting two and two together, but that was in his mind, and that's why he was convincing himself that the child of Roz was Bane. He was saying, if Bane got out of here, I can get out of here. I need to be able to get out of here. And he was driving himself to do that. I loved that, very similar to what happened in Night's End. He, in his first two attempts, was not ready yet. He was not in that mental state where he was ready to go. He hadn't built up his confidence enough yet. He needed those discussions, not just the physical training that he was doing in there, because we saw the physical training gradually progress, him building himself back up. But besides that physical training that he was doing, he was having mental discussions in that prison where they were telling him, the difference between you and that child was that child feared death. And Bruce started admitting to himself, I do fear death. I fear dying before saving my city. The guy basically said, if you keep putting that rope around you, which makes sense, the rope's there. So if you don't make it, the rope's going to catch you. You're going to slam against the side, you can hurt yourself and that type of thing. But odds are pretty good. As long as you land a certain way, you're going to survive. If you go up there without a rope, you fall, you're done. You're too far up. You're going to splat. And he said the difference between you and that person was they were in a moment where it was complete fear of death. It was either do or die. And the second Bruce went up there without the rope, you saw that moment, and there was a power in that moment, that climbing up, because he'd fallen twice before, of that jump. And I just loved the way that built. And just how there was a mental state there, saying, this guy, this Bane, is mentally, totally in the zone of he is not going to die. He is going to win. He, does not want to die. He wants to live. He wants to accomplish his goals. He, is totally into that whole thing. Whereas your spirit isn't in that place. That was a rebuilding of his spirit as well.
Oh,
to
God,
be,
yeah.
To be the guy who could climb out of there. The same guy that we saw in Begins when he first walked up to Raisha's place is the guy that came out of that pit. And I loved seeing him kind of come full circle. He looked different when he came back to Gotham. He looked more there. It was less of the gray tone. I loved the way that they did his hair and makeup in coming back to Gotham versus how it was when we saw him earlier in the film, where there was more gray. He seemed less alive, less useful. The guy that came back to Gotham was very much a guy who had trained and been through hell and survived and has got a different outlook on life. The joking was back. The sense of humor was back. It's stuff we saw with Lucius Fox, but it wasn't to the same level that we see when he's talking to Selina when he comes back.
Yeah, definitely. And it was neat when they were doing those, when he did the first couple failed jump attempts. I was sitting there thinking, it's the rope. It's the rope. And I wasn't thinking as far as it went with the psychologically behind it. I was literally thinking the rope was slowing you down. The rope's holding you back. It's not helping you. And, I liked when they actually laid it out why it wasn't actually the physically rope holding you physically back. It was the mentally holding you back. And that was some kind of neat thing because I was thinking that, but I wasn't thinking 3 steps ahead. I wasn't thinking the true reason, what behind the rope. If he had just taken off the rope without actually knowing and realizing, he probably would have fallen to his death. He needed that whole realization of everything. He needed that complete, this is it. It's now or never. And when that last time when he was going and he packed up stuff for provisions for his trip back to Gotham, I'm like, okay, he's ready to do this. He's obviously going to do it again this time. And then he holds back, no rope. I'm like, okay, here it comes. And you knew it was coming, but I still cheered when he made the jump. And I love the fact that when he gets up to the top there, he throws a rope back down the pit. So he's basically freeing everybody else from that pit if that rope is long enough. I'm not sure if the rope would go all the way down. I'm assuming it would. I'm assuming that's probably how the provisions are lowered or something.
Otherwise, what was the point in throwing down the rope?
Yeah, I loved seeing that little sequence where he just throws the rope back, helping anybody else rise up and get freedom. And I thought that was a cool, just little extra moment added to the story that they didn't need it. They didn't need him doing now save yourselves. They didn't need anything like that taking away from the moment. It was just the subtle throwing the rope back in. That was a cool thing.
He had provisions the other times, at least the first time. Because he had that shoulder strap on him in the first jump.
I never saw him before. Yeah. I didn't see him in the first 2 attempts.
It was definitely there in the first one because when I watched the film the second time, he put on that shoulder strap. They made more emphasis on it the third time. Everything you said is true. Now, I will say this: the first time I watched the film, I didn't notice it either because they didn't make a big deal out of it. He just climbed up, but he had that same, it was that shoulder bag that he put on, where the one strap went over the shoulder. It looked almost like a paper bag, for paper boys and that type of thing from when we were kids. It had that kind of vibe to it. And he put that on himself for the first jump. I don't remember the second jump. I can't say that I know that for sure, but the first jump, he definitely had it on himself. So he was planning on leaving the first time through with provisions. It was the third time, I think it was more emphasized because I think they were trying to build us as the viewer that this is the one he's going to make it on.
This is it, yeah. And so he threw on a Newsies bag.
Yeah, that's the best. That's the closest thing that looked like to me was a Newsies bag. I just remember as a kid because I had a lot of friends who had paper routes, and I would help them with their paper routes, and that's what the bag looked like to me. But I liked that whole sequence, and again, like you said, framed with what Bane and them were doing there. Freeing the people from Blackgate, starting to do these trials. As we had people from the outside of Resistance building, who were saying, okay. We got Gordon and his crew. I loved Gordon almost getting killed.
Yeah.
During that sequence. They blocked away every single police officer underground, except for the fact that they knew above ground we had Jim Gordon. Blake realized that, okay, I survived here. Gordon's the only other person still up here. I need to save Gordon. I love that Gordon saved himself, and Blake, being a rookie, didn't check the corners.
Yeah.
It's great. Dude, it's such a great moment because I'm a Jim Gordon sucker, and Gary Oldman so good as Jim Gordon in all this.
Oh, big time! That was again a really cool cop moment. And whenever I get those kind of moments in TV or movies or anything, I do cheer because I'm like, yeah, that's neat. Just come on, rookie, always check the corners. And like, you knew, going to that sequence, I knew Jim Gordon would be fine. I knew those guys were not going to get the drop on him. He was going to get out and he was going to deal with it, and Blake was going to come into the bad guys being down. I knew all that was going to happen just because I've seen, so many, you've seen so many movies, you've seen so much stuff with Jim Gordon, you know what's going to happen, but I still enjoyed seeing it.
Yeah.
And that is a combination of what is being written, what is the actor, how they're portraying it. There was just that every little piece that clicked in place. When you know what's going to happen, but you still cheer when it happens, that's a sign of a really good story. And that's what this movie has. This has a solid plot and story behind it, and some really great acting that because it's a comic book movie, because it's a Batman movie, it won't get the recognition that it should. The actors won't get the credentials that they should from this. Now, comic book fans will say, yeah, he was a great Jim Gordon, but just the regular general critics out there won't be singing Gary Oldman's praise over his portrayal of the character.
Have you read any of the reviews online?
No, I have not.
You need to. Okay. I'm going to disagree with you on that. There's been a lot of tremendous reviews from this film from, very well-respected film critics who've been praising this film. I'm actually really glad to see that, because I'm first of all, I'm not knocking you, because I agree that I think we've had in past history this view towards superhero movies, comic book movies as not being quite up to par. And I honestly think that should have stopped with the Donner Superman flick myself. I think that original Superman film, should have really put the mind that these films are just as valid as anything else. I don't think that's exclusive to superhero movies, though. I think sci-fi and fantasy in general, the genre, is not as well respected as drama. I just don't think it is. Comedy, I think, falls into that same problem as well. I think comedy's also diminished. I think we're getting reviewers nowadays who are starting to get it, and they're starting to realize that a film does not have to be a drama or exclusively a drama in order for it to be just as valid. Because, there's so much drama going on in this film, and the acting on this is so brilliant because of it. I think we're seeing a lot of reviewers who are stepping up and not doing that, not diminishing this film. They're seeing this film for exactly what it is, and the praise and the critical, acclaim for this film has been pretty solid. There's some, naysayers, and that's fine. That's going to happen with any movie. It happens with any comic, but I've seen more and more of them stepping up and noting and praising the acting in this film. Some of them don't get it, and that's okay. But I really have seen more of that, and it's great, because I think this is a film that it isn't just for comic fans. I think there's a lot of nods to us in there, in the way the story's told, but I think some of the changes that are done are in order to consider the people that aren't, and to do a well-crafted story where you don't need to know the ins and outs of the Batman universe. You just need to have seen the other two movies. I do think the other two movies are essential viewing for this.
Oh, big time. Definitely, you need to see the other two. This isn't a jump in on the last one. This is, you can call it a trilogy, or you can call it a 3-part movie where it's all the same story told in 3 separate parts. And I guess that is a definition of a trilogy, isn't it? I realized as I was saying it, I'm trying to make some dramatic thing where it's really the same movie, but it's in 3 parts. Yeah, Jim, that's the definition of a trilogy, you idiot.
You can call them the Trinity, or you can call them 3 people, but...
I'm going to get beaten up over this one, aren't I?
No, I get what thematically, I get what you're saying, though. I agree with you in the sense, I do think that this watches very well as one big film. The Lord of the Rings comment that I made earlier, I think, is a really good one, in the sense that I don't think you can watch and get the full impact of Return of the King if you haven't seen the other 2 films. I think you could see Return of the King, and they give you enough in the beginning that, just like this movie did, that I think you can watch this as a complete movie without seeing the other 2. But I think a lot of the themes that Nolan's going for have been crafted in the other 2 movies leading up to this. And I think, that it's much more satisfying if you've seen all of them. I do think you can watch this by itself. And I think you probably could with Return of the King, too, but you're sure missing a lot. Yeah. If you haven't done that. So I think that's why I use that comparison. So I agree with you. It actually does feel like one big movie. And I really liked that aspect of this. Lucius Fox is a character that I'd like to talk about a little bit. Actually, before we talk about Lucius, though, I want to say one more thing about Jim Gordon. The one thing I love about Jim Gordon is his conviction. And even when he makes mistakes, or what he perceives to be a mistake, or there's something that, even if he believes, because I think he believes what they did with Harvey Dent was right. I think he believed it was a good way to clean up the streets of Gotham. You've got a city that was so corrupt, it was so far on the other side, that the only way to do it is to take an extreme action on the other side of things. And they did that using Harvey Dent as a symbol. I think he believes they were justified in doing that. I think he believes that his friend, and I love that he called him his friend. I wish you had a friend. When he was defending himself to Blake, I thought that was a powerful moment. Blake's role, where Blake is this guy looking at all of this and saying, wow, look just how bad things have been. And look just how corrupt things have been. And look all the lies, all the, injustice that has gone on in Gotham. And even our heroes have lies surrounding them. And I think Blake's one of those guys that wants to be and wants, there to be a cut and dry good and bad. He wants to get past the gray area, if that makes sense. And when he has that discussion with Gordon, you see a Gordon who I think in that powerful moment was saying, he was trying to keep the dirt off my hands. And I don't think he was trying to say that his hands weren't dirty. He was saying that Batman did this so I could help continue to be that leader in Gotham. As commissioner, I could have respect. I was a friend of Harvey Dent's. Harvey Dent was this good guy versus him going public and saying I was a friend of Batman's. They would have lost something there. Harvey Dent as a public symbol is a lot more powerful than Batman would have been, which is what Bruce saw in The Dark Knight.
And you look at just, that whole, do the ends justify the means has been a question that's thrown out through anything and everything throughout history. And with Harvey Dent and what they did, how many thousands of criminals were locked up in Blackgate? And then you have the Dent Act that kept them behind bars and, kept them from doing the revolving door of justice where criminals come in and they get out immediately and then they're back to doing their thing and then cops have to pick them up again. And it's just that whole, it's a concept that is, one, in reality happens, but especially in a city like Gotham, it was constantly happening. These criminals were constantly getting out and they had at their hands the tools to keep them away. And we saw that with how the police started cleaning up the streets, how Gotham started being a safer place to live. Batman wasn't needed for patrolling. Batman wasn't needed on there. They even made a couple points in times where they're laughing about how eventually the detective squad is going to be handling, it was like I think like rescuing kittens or something like that. It was some trivial little thing, but they're like Gotham's going places, and it was what they did with Harvey. It was the Dent Act. It was all those different things that allowed for it to happen. And when you're Jim Gordon, you're sitting there and you're like, on one hand, I got all this good stuff. On the other hand, it's all based on a lie. And you can tell that just was eating away at him. And, that's the kind of man he is. Some people would say, hey, this is good. Everything's gravy. Everything's golden. I can retire, and I can retire a success. But not Gordon. Gordon had to, it's about there is right and there is wrong. And he had to, in his heart, that was his big conflict. And I think when he had that whole moments with Blake, he was seeing probably that younger version of him, himself in this kid that, where he looks at right and wrong and he's like, no, it's more than that. There's things you can't understand yet. And I love just seeing those two interactions. Same thing with the Bruce and Blake interaction.
Hang on, though, before you get to that, because I know you're going to Bruce and Blake now, but you have to set up before Blake met with Bruce. He talked to Gordon on the rooftops, and he was the one that made that comment that you mentioned earlier to Gordon about rescuing kittens.
Right.
And that was when he was asking about Batman. And he didn't put a question in there. He was referencing those events. He was saying to himself, you notice that Batman disappeared right after that?
Yeah.
Because he was the one that set that tone that Batman was not seen again. After the events of Dark Knight, when we saw Batman driving off, that was the last Batman was seen in Gotham. So he was setting that tone there. And that built to then, and go ahead, you were going to make comments about when Blake eventually meets with Bruce.
Well, when Blake meets with Bruce, that initial and then the follow-up sequences, you see just that discussion, where the path where Blake is going with, Bruce about just what is right, what is wrong. Well, why did why did you walk away? Why did you, not come back? Why did you let this happen? And it was just every little bits and pieces. They always had that kind of interaction. And again, as I said earlier, Blake was kind of like the conscience for everybody. Blake was that sounding board that people would go to and would, not realize they're doing it. And I thought that, again, he was it's a complex but a very straightforward character at the same time. It was a weird duality that he had, that he kind of meshed multiple different characters, multiple different lines that he could fit in with everybody. And I thought that was just a great usage and a great character tool to have in this script. Something that probably wasn't around in the other films. And in a way, we always talk about how Alfred is kind of like the Bruce sounding board. Well, Blake was the sounding board for everybody.
Well, he also served the purpose, though, of motivation, reminding the viewer why Bruce did what he did. Bruce was always striving for Batman to no longer be needed in Gotham. He was striving for a Gotham where, Batman's goal had been accomplished. He saved Gotham. He was looking at Dent as being that public face that could save Gotham. He was looking as Dent to be the way to give himself the life with Rachel that he thought he was going to have, which is why he was so lost. No Rachel, because he didn't know. Alfred was protecting his emotions. He didn't know that Rachel had chosen Harvey over him because of his choices. He didn't know that that happened. So he was still saving himself for, his dead love, not realizing that Alfred had lied to him to protect him. It was interesting how that all played out, to see Blake coming to him and Batman saying to him, it just wasn't needed anymore. It was, we'd accomplished the goal. Batman served its purpose. And the symbol that Batman had been, he took the fall so that Harvey Dent could be put up on the pedestal. And so the Harvey Dent Act could do what it did. And it looked like it was successful. Look at how Gotham was at the beginning of the film. Things seemed better until, as Selina was mentioned, there's a storm coming. And that storm came, all right. I don't think it was the storm Selina thought was going to come, though.
No, she didn't see that coming. She knew something was coming down the line. She knew that, once again, Gotham was going to take a dark turn. And, again...
You know what? No, I'm going to take it back. At that first those parties when she was telling Bruce that, she had already been in contact with Daggett, and she'd been asked to lift the fingerprints. So I think through events and through what she was being asked to do, she probably more than Bruce would have an idea that there are people operating behind the scenes in positions of power that are looking to change this world that has been crafted.
Yeah, but I don't think she was seeing the Bane level. She was seeing Daggett take over Wayne. She was seeing guys like Daggett, the corruption, come back into politics. She was seeing that kind of stuff was going to happen again.
Which is the change.
The epic, yeah.
Yeah. That's what I mean, though. That's the change she saw coming. And I think what happened was, though, she got the change that she wanted. And even her friend referenced this later in the film when the friend was saying, this is what we wanted. Look, we're in somebody else's home, but it's all of ours. And this is what you wanted, right? And in that moment, she had to say to herself, sometimes you get what you want and you realized it wasn't ever what you were looking for. Selina's faced with that in that moment, and that was powerful. Because she's realizing this was not what she really wanted. This is not what she wanted Gotham to be. This is not what she wanted to... And to admit that was fundamentally at her core would have to make her question everything that she's ever done, everything that she ever wanted about herself. And that's Bruce, I think, notices that in her. Those discussions that he has with her where he notices that she's something more and, that there's that element in her, those are things she wasn't ready to face yet. And that's why when he's saying those things to her, it really forces her to... We saw her facing those things, but she wasn't outwardly doing it. We saw it in the way she was carrying herself and the way she was reacting to all this. She wasn't as happy as other people were. And that was one of the great things about seeing, during that sequence where Bruce was retraining himself and he was in prison, seeing Selina go through this. I think we got a lot of storytelling with her there, where we got to see just how uncomfortable she was with all of this.
Yeah. We mentioned this briefly when she protected that one little kid, how that was a very Catwoman-ish type of action, and just showing there's more levels to her than just being a thief. We saw the growth of her. Now, that was something that I kind of really digged, considering how she always had her part of town. How she was always the East End, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it kind of seemed to me like she was establishing that in the movie. And it wasn't anything laid out like, hey, the East End's my area. She said, you come into my part of town, you don't do that. And it was just it was one of those things where if you didn't know anything about her, you would say, oh, that's kind of neat. You would get the whole point behind it. But it was just that little Easter egg. They had little Easter eggs with her. And like her costume. they never really, I don't think, ever officially called her Catwoman. She was always referred to as Selena. But when she lifts up her goggles, they kind of make those little cat ears. So it was a functional part of the costume. When she drops it down, everything looks normal again. But when she had them raised up, she had the little ears. And I was like, that's kind of a neat way to do it, where she's not going to wear some goofy costume. She's going to wear a functional outfit. She's going to wear something that has an actual purpose behind it. And
the dinner
I was
party.
like, okay, that's cool.
The dinner party. Remember where she was wearing the mask? She had the cat ears on then, too.
Well, but that was a cat mask, though.
Well, no, there was a mask and the cat ears were separate. She was wearing a black mask, and then the cat ears were like a thing that was in her hair. But it was, Bruce even made comment then how an interesting outfit for a cat burglar.
Right, they referred to her as a cat burglar, but I don't think they ever called her Catwoman.
No, they didn't. But I'm agreeing with you, and you're like,
okay.
I don't know what you're trying to argue about.
Oh, okay. I thought you were arguing with me.
No.
I'm ready for a fight.
No, I'm building on what you said. I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying that, like, there's been other references in the film. No, they did not call her Catwoman. I agree with you. But I liked the subtle references to that being who she was without it being the case. Because I think sometimes I'm a fan of, like in Earth 2 right now, for example, Jay Garrick hasn't named himself the Flash. That's something that the media's kind of done. I've always been partial to that idea with Catwoman too. Like, she's a cat burglar. She's not looking for a name. She's going out and doing her thing, and that would be something. If she's called Catwoman, she would be labeled by someone else outside of it. I don't remember if there were any newspaper articles, and I wish I would remember that now, that ever labeled her as Catwoman in what she did. I don't remember there being anything referencing that. Even when Bruce pulled up her information, I don't remember anywhere in there labeling her Catwoman. I don't think they needed to. I think the way they handled that was absolutely perfect in this film.
Well, no, yeah, I think I remember when he had the internet and he was pulling up a record and all that stuff. I don't remember ever seeing Catwoman. The words in a headline. There was cat burglar, there was thief, there was different things like that. Jewel thief happened, thing, and it was just stuff like that, but not an actual quote unquote title. And to be honest, I'm glad, because that's more realistic. That's more of they wouldn't label every person that came around have a title, have a villain, wouldn't have a special name to them. Now, they do in comic book universes, but in the real world, we don't have that. We just have a thief. We have a thief, a habitual thief, a repeat offender. We have different labels like that, but not anybody who gets that type of notoriety unless you go extreme.
No, and I really liked, because, I'll be honest, 100% honest with you, until you brought it up, I didn't even think about the fact that she wasn't called Catwoman. That's why I was adding on to what you were saying, because I'm like, oh, that's really cool that he's going down this path, because I didn't even think of that. I think that was something that fits the Nolan-verse, because it is more reality-based. I know it seems strange to say with everything that happened here, but Bruce wasn't healed by some kind of mystical method. He wasn't healed by powers. He wasn't healed by being dropped in the Lazarus pit. His vertebrae was reset, which was a very painful process, and he took months to then rehabilitate himself. I liked that. That, to me, was fitting of how Nolan did his films. Now, that doesn't mean in the next series of Batman films that they can't go into crazy stuff like that. That's one of the great things about the Batman universe. You can stay very rooted in reality. You can get very fantastical. Fantastical hasn't been something that Nolan chose to do in this route. He focused on a real man doing what Batman did, which fits then for a real woman doing what Catwoman does. And I think that's interesting. Lucius Fox. I love Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox in this. The whole series, he's been absolutely terrific. I have zero issue with the fact that Lucius obviously knows that he was Batman. That was stuff, it was pretty clear in the first film that he knew what was going on. The Arsenal, I love that when Bruce shows up, usually when you come here, these little talks are followed by a strange request. You want to see him anyway? Yeah. I like that the two of them connect over their camaraderie for the toys. And that was something that Lucius sees him as a friend, a mutual understanding of the two of them liking gadgets and gizmos. And I'm a gadget nut. I love that kind of stuff. I think it's an aspect of Batman I've always loved. I've loved in James Bond. The John Pertwee of Doctor Who was one of my favorite ones because he used a lot of gadgets and gizmos and things too. And I really love that idea that was brought into all of this, and because that is the cool part about Batman. You know, Jack Nicholson in '89, though, where does he get those wonderful toys? You know, I think that is something that's a part of Batman. What did you think of the Bat?
I love that.
Yeah.
Again, it's a very realistic type of device. I don't know how actual functionality it would be, but just looking at it from my normal regular knowledge base, I would say that would actually work. And how it was, and same thing with the tumbler. I always thought that seemed very realistic. That seemed very real and possible to actually be in a movie. It's the bat wings that we've had in the past, I always kind of questioned, because is the wingspan wide enough to actually give you lift? Because it's the theories of lift and thrust, where the wind speed above the wing is less than the wind speed below the wing, and yada yada, the various natures of physics that I don't completely understand, and just the dynamic of the layout of the bat wings previously, I never thought could actually physically work. This one seemed like it actually could work because it was based more on a helicopter type design. And the style with the one central blade taking care of the lifting, and then external thrusters providing additional speed. And I was like, okay, yeah, I could see this kind of would work. And there's probably some realistic elements to it, but you kind of suspend your disbelief for Batman universe. And some of his more simpler toys, his gas gun that does the grappling hook and does the ropes. I don't know if that could physically, if anybody could actually create a handheld portable unit like that. But I accept it because, it's Batman. He, of course, has that. He's got billions of dollars at his disposal for R&D. Yeah, of course he's going to make that. Yeah, this Bat, yeah, sure, he's going to make that because that's, Batman. He's got the resources. And that was something that you always got to dig about Batman. But when it gets down to it, when it gets down and dirty, it's the man with the toys that is such a cool hero. And that's something you really do capture and do see in the movies.
Talking about the functionality and reality of it, it was funny, in the '89 Batman series and the ones afterwards, I always looked at his suit as a way to show a muscle tone similar to what he has in comics, because you remember in the 60s Batman show when he wore the more nylon-y suit, Adam West's body in there, and it never looked kind of like as toned as the comic books. And I worshipped that show. Batman was never diminished for me. We had a discussion on the last episode about the Robin thing. You gotta remember that Robin wore nylons too, which is why I always laugh when you were talking about the distinction between the Robin costume, because if you think back to the 60s Batman costume, Batman didn't have any more protection than Robin did in the suit that he was wearing. Right. And even in the cartoons back in that era, Batman was wearing very much a sheer to the skin cloth suit, not the armor that we see now. I never considered, though, in like the '89 movies and beyond, and I'm not knocking those films. I loved those films. But I never considered those suits like suits of armor. I always considered them to be like rubber suits that were specifically done to give him more of the look that was closer to the comics. In these films with the Nomex survival suit and that type of thing, because you saw Christian Bale, who was ripped. Always, they showed how strong he was in the training, and that's one of the reasons why I love Batman Begins so much. It was never that he needed that suit to appear. You could throw that cloth suit on Christian Bale. He's gonna look pretty close to the comic book dude because he built himself up for this. I love that the Nomex suit in this feels to me like we're doing the functional armor. I think it's one of the reasons why in the comics now, I like that the newer 52 version of him, that suit is really being described as a suit of armor as well. It's one of those deals where just films sometimes influence the comics. I don't know because I know in the comics prior to the New 52, they've referenced that he has all kinds of armor built around the suit and everything and underneath the suit. I think now, though, my acceptance of an armored look on Batman is much higher because of how this film has handled it. I think they really did a great job of a hybrid where he doesn't look like Iron Man, if that makes sense. I adore Iron Man, but Iron Man should look like Iron Man. Batman shouldn't look like Iron Man. Exactly. Two distinctly different characters. They did a great job with the survival suits they invented in this of making it look like Batman and not somebody else. Iron Man, one of the things I've always adored about Iron Man, I loved reading Iron Man in many, many years. One of the things I always loved about Iron Man is that his suits have changed and adapted over time, and they're clearly suits of armor, very distinct difference from what Batman wears. And I love the functionality of the suit in this. It's something that really works for me. It's something that I'm glad we're seeing more of in the comic book world, because it's more of a modern day approach. You have smaller, thinner fabrics. And I love that in these movies, he progressively in the second movie was saying, I need something lighter. I need something more with more increased movement and functionality. That was something he was continually adapting and developing over time. And I think it just added a lot to the character into this series. I like that the suit became something functional and realistic and rooted in reality.
Yeah, and the thing with Lucius Fox, and it's really, I don't have a strong knowledge of him in the comics. It's the movies. The movie, was pretty much my main introduction to him. That and the animated series, he was in that, and I kind of had a little bit of knowledge from him. So for me, Morgan Freeman is Lucius Fox. He is just the man for me, and just that characterization. Everything we talked about with Jim Gordon and, with just how Gary Oldman's portrayal of Jim Gordon is just this great Jim Gordon portrayal. For me, just I can't see anybody else playing the role of Lucius Fox than Morgan Freeman. It was just he had just every quality that I would expect in this type of person, and this type of just where he went and where he, how he came about. I was like, this fits, this makes sense. And it's part of it is just the actor, just that presence that he brings to, this role. And he brings it to pretty much any other role where he has that mentoring, that type of fathering, that I could go to this man and I can trust him with my deepest secrets because he will not betray my trust. And that is kind of that quality he brought to it. And he's one of the characters that I'm going to miss, because if they do another movie in time, or if there's another TV show, it won't be this Lucius Fox. It won't be this person portraying it. It won't be this character. And this is a character that I will really miss, because yes, we see him, in the comics. Yes, we see him. We'll probably see him again in another movie or other adaptations or whatnot. But it won't be this guy. It won't be this right here. Boom. What we're getting in time.
He wasn't the mentor in the comics. He was always the trusted leader of Wayne Enterprises because of his, he wasn't corrupt. He was, his family was trustworthy. He was trustworthy. So they grabbed the type of caliber of character he was right from there. I liked the addition of the films of turning him into a mentor figure because of the need to get the gadgets and gizmos and stuff like that. It made a lot of sense to do it that way. So that was something they added on to him. But what I liked where it came from was Lucius would be somebody who was involved in Wayne Enterprises. So if you take this person who is a trusted person at Wayne Enterprises and you put him in the position of keeping the secret of the R&D department, it just all goes together and makes sense. So they took a character who was well established as being a trusted ally of Bruce Wayne, basically because Bruce Wayne has always been the one who, exactly how they portrayed him in the film, he hasn't quite taken the leadership role at Wayne Enterprises always so seriously, because of the need to keep the Batman persona secret. Lucius has always been the public face of Wayne, being that trusted face of Wayne, because he is that good guy that you see. So that's been the distinction of him. Lucius has been a long-standing character for that, but you're right on that. I don't know. You might see if they do another, reboot, or if they continue on this series. I don't know what route they're going to go. I'm assuming they have to do a reboot now.
Yeah.
But if they do a reboot, I don't know that you're going to get this Lucius Fox. And that's okay. But I greatly liked it. I liked the use and the choice of using him. I think if you're going to do a reboot, I don't know if you do a reboot if it's... I would change some things, because one of the things that I thought worked in the Spider-Man reboot that they just did was the fact that it didn't feel like they were rehashing what they did in the previous movies. They are doing their own take on it. So I don't know. Either that or we continue on the series.
I don't know how you continuing the series. At the point it's at, I think they're at if they were, now granted, I say I can't see them doing it, but I would love to see a continuation of Gotham City at the point it is, because they were such a great, groundwork laid that I would love to see this continued, but I don't see how they could do it. They would need to do a reboot, need to start over and just start the process over again. And hopefully the next round they'll get somebody else who has a multiple story idea, who has, a progression they want to take the story through. Or maybe they'll do like Marvel where they'll say, okay, let's start interconnecting some stuff and actually build a DC universe in film. I don't know where they would go with this or how they would do it, but it's, I just can't see Hollywood saying, let's continue on with this. Let's, see where the story goes from where we're at.
Well, here's the thing I'm thinking. When you look at this, it's funny how I'm a big fan of what Marvel's done with their connectability. And I'm usually one of the biggest advocates screaming that, I want to see DC do that connectivity. It really wouldn't have worked with this film series.
No.
I think, to put a Superman in this world would have really taken away from this world. Because this is a world that's very rooted in reality. I mean, which is crazy to say when you've got, like, the Joker and the Scarecrow and all that stuff running around. But even in the way that they were presented, they were more rooted as, real nutty people who would do this kind of stuff. We didn't get a Clayface morphing into other people, if that makes sense.
Right.
So the choices of the villains from the Batman universe they chose were ones that were more suited in, yes, fantastical, but they're more realistically based. So I don't know. In the new series, there's a lot of opportunities to link it more like you're talking about and open up that end where you've got a Batman that is more exposed to a fantastical world while looking back at this as a framework for what you do to identify that character. I don't know. I don't know what route they would go after this. This series has been pretty perfect for me. And I didn't find myself walking out of that movie going, geez, I wish Green Lantern popped by. I did. I mean, I honestly, and I rarely would say this with any superhero film because I'm a fan of that. I think that would have diminished from this. It would have been like, huh? What? Yeah. Why? Because then he would have been saying, well, why didn't he come and help out?
Well, with this giant neutron bomb, that could have very easily been a Superman fix. Yeah. Snatch it up, throw it up into space, done, end of story. Or Green Lantern, cast a little energy bubble around it, boom, okay, everything's fine. So that's part of the reason that this universe, to me, has... It's had, we keep throwing out elements of realism in the series. And all three movies have had that realistic style to it, which we always say it's kind of odd saying in a comic book movie or a guy dressed up like a bat, it's realistic, but it was. And the supernatural, the metahuman side of the heroes universe would, kind of distort that, would throw it off a little bit. You have to have these characters that have the element of, that, when I'm sitting there watching the movie, I say, you know what? If I trained, I could actually do that. I could actually beat up those 6 guys if I had, time training and was actually in decent shape. Yeah, I could see that happening. Now, granted, could I ever get into Batman shape? No. Because 1, I lack the discipline, but 2, that's just a level beyond what I would think a normal human being could achieve. So, but it's still, I can sit here and say, yes, it's realistic. Yes, I could do that. I could become, the sensei of whatnot, the crime fighter of Cleveland, if I wanted to do that. If I saw the need rise up in my city, I could do that. And, it wouldn't go as well for me as it did for Bruce, but,
I know what bridge you could start with, Bridge Man. But, it's funny. One of the things I really liked about this series is you saw the negative impact on his personal life that being Batman is. That training to the level that you're talking about does have. That was something I always liked about this series, was that these weren't brushed off things. This guy didn't just become Batman and everything worked out for him. There were trade-offs, and severe trade-offs to that, including the relationship with Rachel Dawes. He had to give that up because she could not be with Batman.
Well, you think how many Rachel Dawses are there out there that were for Bruce Wayne? Just how many people that were kind of passed through his life who he could have pursued something with them. He could have had just this life with him, but no, he always had to go back to the mission. No, it was always about the training. No, it was always about what he had to do. He had to put aside his personal life for this. And, that was something that actually Alfred really drove home for me in this movie when he was sitting there telling him, hey, it's over, but you're not moving on. You're not getting on with your life. He's like, and even when Bruce threw out the cops couldn't catch him. The cops couldn't stop him. They could if they had your technology. They could if you gave them the tools to do it. You don't have to be Batman. You could be the benefactor to the police. You could give them this great computer, system. You could give them, the Batwing. You could give them all the different, tools and toys and gadgets. You could actually help out Gotham PD. But
Bruce is justified in this, though, and Bruce actually is justified by what happened with Bane. Bruce said, "Here's the problem: I start giving them this technology, the wrong person could turn it into a weapon. Look what happened with the energy sequence; it turned into a bomb that in 5 months was going to blow up the city." So it's funny how those events. I agree with Alfred in principle, and that's one of the things with Alfred. You sit there and say Alfred was, to a certain extent, was right, but Bruce's concerns were just as valid because of what happened in this movie. Because they took the technology and warped it. So, and this is a city that, yes, there was a lot more good, tried and true, trustworthy police officers on the Gotham Police Department in this world now, post Dark Knight, but there's still, all it takes is one to get a hold of that technology, one to pervert it. That's why he kept it from them. And I like how the movie justifies all that.
Oh, God, yeah. And there's a lot of guys I know that, I would trust them with this level of technology. But there's also people who I'm like, I would never put this in their hands in a million years because who knows what they would do with it. Just, they're not bad people, but you know what? Maybe they could very easily make a mistake. They could slip up. They could just, it's a little abuse of a power, a little bit of, hey, I wonder what this button does type of mindset that could cause a whole chain of events and a whole, nasty spin on life. So it's those cool moments that I can have these arguments, I can have these discussions, and you can have this rationality when you start going through, and it's all inspired and motivated by a movie, and it's all inspired by a comic book movie. It's not just, we talked earlier about with critics and just, you look at an adventure movie, you look at an action movie, and you don't think deep conversations. You think, oh, that was a cool explosion. You see that special effect, oh, yeah, that was a neat fight sequence. Here, there's actually deeper levels of thought going into it. It's one of the funny things that the second movie had, as well as this one did. There were financial crimes being reported and being dealt with in the movie. Now, financial crimes is what I do. So for me, I was like, yay, money laundering, yay, I know that stuff. And then, with the trading fraud and all that, I was like, oh my God, I know this stuff. This is kind of cool. I'm glad the financial criminal element is being brought into it because that's a huge, huge part of what criminals do. It's multi-billion-dollar industry is involved in financial crimes. You can't have your Godfathers. You can't have your Penguins and your kingpins of crime without them having the money, without them having laundering, without them having the paper trails. And you have to have that part of any investigation. And here we have it. In a comic book movie, we have money laundering. And I was just like, this is awesome.
Jim, can we get another isolated bit where you talk about how awesome money laundering is? Yay, money laundering! Yes, they have money laundering. It's awesome.
and the people I work with would just shake their heads, say, "Yeah, I could see him saying that."
Yeah, one of the things I really do like about this movie series is how fleshed out the world is. because it isn't just the main cast that we deal with. It's the whole world around them that they also have to deal with. Gotham City in this, and you mentioned this Gotham earlier in the discussion, this Gotham is living and breathing. There's a lot going on in this Gotham that has to be dealt with, and that's one of the things that I really, truly enjoyed about this film series has been the fleshing out of the atmosphere and the mood and the tone, day and night in this series. It feels like it's still going on. The time progression, I know I mentioned that earlier in this one, of this film, a lot of that was due to the fact that we didn't get a sequence where we felt like the city wasn't still moving while things were happening to the main characters. The city kept moving on. We saw things happening to citizens. We saw things happening to every character that was involved in this story. There wasn't a lot of sequences where you're like, well, what was character B doing over here? No, we know that. And that was one of the things that I think was the strength of this film. The choice to go 2 hours and 45 minutes was brilliant, because if they hadn't done that, so much would have been lost on the sense of volume and depth and of the despair that was going on in this film. What does Bruce have to fight back for? Well, we're seeing that those that he loves, those that he cares about, and the city that he loves, the city that he cares about, everything that everyone around him is sacrificed for, including Rachel, is being destroyed and demolished. I mean, when those explosions go off, Bane, we didn't really talk about this, in trapping the police officers. And that football field, the explosion goes off. That sequence where the kid is singing and Bane walks up and he goes, he made mention about how beautiful the voice was. It was, like a passing comment there. But then he comes out into that field and then in front of this crowd basically tells them, this is your chance to take back control of your city. And he brings out the professor and says, is there anybody else that can create this bomb but you? No. He kills him and then says, one of you in the crowd has the switch. Yeah, it's basically saying at this moment, there is a citizen of Gotham who has the switch, which wasn't a lie.
Right.
But it sets this whole tone of the power to the people. But it's also a power without rules, without laws, without authority. It's laws and authority that they're just making up. It's a bizarre, I don't want to say martial law because that's not really right. It's this person who's through terrorism has come in and made law. It's law of terrorism. Terror is really ruling Gotham at this point.
Anarchy rules.
Yeah. So it's an interesting turn of events. And it really was philosophically breaking every structure that Bruce and anyone associated with him who was trying to make positive change in Gotham, they were crashing them down. I mean, they blew up the mayor. That was like crazy.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? When you talk about Gotham as a city, every great, Batman story has to have that element of Gotham being a living entity. And the first two movies, they're filmed in Chicago. This time, a lot of those sequences were filmed in Pittsburgh, which, again, I was like, you know what? I never sat there and really thought, okay, that's Pittsburgh. Now, when they were in Heinz Field, okay, that I knew that was Pittsburgh. And the fact that the Gotham Knights were wearing black and gold, which are the Steelers' colors, I was like, okay, it's,
Heinz
I kind of, what?
Heinz Ward.
I said Heinz Field.
No, but Heinz Ward was also there on the field. Right. Heinz Ward was the football player that when the whole thing was
he was the guy
down.
who did the run back.
Right,
yeah.
Throwing that out there too. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's, it was actually Pittsburgh, but it never felt like, I wasn't sitting there watching a movie saying, okay, this is Pittsburgh, pretending to be Gotham. That felt like Gotham. And even the sequences that they did film back in Chicago, because there was a couple in Chicago, a couple in, over, in Pittsburgh, it felt like all one city to me. And I've been to Pittsburgh enough that I know what the city looks like, and I was able to pick out some stuff where I think there was a couple places where I've been to. I'm like, I think that's that one place where I think I've been there. And I think that's right down by, right by off their main strip there. And there was a couple of different areas, but I never once felt like, okay, this is Pittsburgh. And that for me was, again, just a greatness of the film. It was this feel that I got the feeling that I was actually looking at Gotham. I was actually in Gotham City watching this stuff play out, and its film location and just the cinematography of the movie. I know in all the past movies we've had these great breathtaking scenes where that one Tokyo scene with Bruce when he snatches up the money launderer again, and just a couple other just the broad boom, big scenes. This movie also had some of those really cool city landscape moments where you're like, this is Gotham City right here. And that the destruction of the city, the blowing up of the different bridges, the dropping of the football field, all those scenes were just these great monumental moments. But it wasn't just because it was a really cool explosion. It was a cool exploration of Gotham, an exploration of what can the city survive. What can the people survive? Can they rise up from this? And what will rise up? Will the cream of the crop, or will it be the deviant people who feed on society rising up? What is going to happen? What will happen to Gotham City?
Or will the spirit of Gotham and Batman rise? Like he did out of that. I loved that was what they were cheering.
Yeah.
When they wanted him to rise out of the prison. That was great. But it was that whole theme throughout this whole thing of rising up and, who has more conviction. It was really a great way to show, I think, as a society, not to be ambivalent. Because you should remember that Miranda or Talia was talking about how Bruce projects himself as in Bruce Wayne mode as being ambivalent, but that you're not ambivalent if you're trying to do these great causes like the energy, and then you drop into despair when things like that don't come to fruition. I love that, she called him out on that. That was stuff that I thought was really terrific and interesting in the movie, that they went that route. Because I do think, as a society, it's important for us not to be ambivalent to government and to laws and to rules and things. I'm not for overthrowing government. I think that, what they did in the film was to show us that's not what we want. What we want to do is take a more active role in choosing leaders who have our beliefs and are heading in the directions that we want to go in and things like that. And I think that was, if there's one powerful message and undertone that was in there, was the importance of having a law and rule structure that we all believe in. And as a society, having some order that we all believe in and that, gives us a better life, a safer life. They were trying to bring back order and structure to Gotham, Gordon and Batman, with what they did with Harvey Dent. And in the film, I think they put Gotham in a better place to be that city again, without the lie.
Oh, definitely. Gotham is being reborn again throughout this. And I think that was the big bit where Gordon was trying to get Blake to stay on the force, because he knew this is a good cop. This is a guy who has a code of honor. This is somebody we need on the force. And, Blake is following a different path. And it's one of the things that always made me wonder with the next, the unmentioned future that is going to happen in this universe is what will happen when Gordon, for the first time, sees Blake in costume. Will he know or will he not know? That's, and those are the things I wish, part of me wishes the story would continue just for those moments, just to get these answers and these questions that will never happen.
One of my favorite moments in Batman Begins was when Rachel threw that comment at Bruce about, it's not who you are on the inside, it's what you do that defines you. And then when she asked later in the film, who are you? When, she was talking to Batman, you could die. And he brings that line back.
Yeah.
I love that when Gordon never asked who he was, but Bruce revealed it by saying, Gordon was saying you're a hero and all that. And Bruce was saying a hero can also be a police officer who, wraps his coat around you and tells you that everything's going to be all right, in those moments. And that led to Gordon's reveal that he was Bruce Wayne. I thought that was so cool. I really liked how that played out. And I do think we'd be remiss if we don't go back and talk about when Bruce finally does come back to Gotham and builds his army. He uses Blake, and he and Blake bust out the police officers. And they begin this trek of, I loved that his moment of saying, hey, listen, you've given me the army that I need. Now our job is to try and save as many people as possible. And he sends Blake on that mission to try and save people, to try and save lives, to try and get them over the bridge. It fails miserably. But it makes sense to say, hey, if this goes wrong, we have to have a backup plan of trying to get people out of here if at all possible. I liked that attention to detail. That was something that you would do in this situation because, you're dealing with a bomb that was set to go off in minutes, and you've got to make the decision to say, if this goes pear-shaped, How many people can we save? It's better to save a busload of kids than nobody.
Yeah.
And that thinking, that mentality was great. I love how Blake used the kids as saying, okay, you guys know these streets, no more than 2 blocks. Tell as many people as you can, then get right back here. We're going. I love the kid, whose brother ended up dying, how he was drawing the bat symbols all over the place, and Blake adopted that as kind of his theme as he was going along. Blake was doing the chalk drawings too, but that kid asking, is he back? And I love that was never spoken between the two of them. The way Blake looked at him, the kid kind of knew that he was saying, yeah, he's here. Let's go on with it. I love that it was an unspoken thing between the two of them. It showed the relationship that he developed with that kid that I thought was really, really great. He didn't really need a confirmation. It was just sometimes some things are better left unsaid. But then Batman's back in that moment. I'm sorry, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say one of the things I loved about Blake in that sequence was, again, he's the instrument of hope.
Yeah.
When they go through and he's getting these kids rally and he is, saying, hey, we're out of here now. Now is the time. We got to go for it. And when he's on that, when he's on the bridge and he's trying to convince that officer to let them cross, he kept walking. Even though, you take one step, we'll shoot you. You take a second step, we'll blow the bridge. And he's walking. They're shooting at his feet, and he keeps going. And after they blow the bridge and they can't get across, he's telling the kids, okay, get back on the bus, we'll be okay. And the priest is like, this is an atom bomb. It's not going to be. He's like, I don't want their last minutes to be thinking of this. I want them to think everything will be okay. And that, that's just that true hero moment, that hope doesn't die. Bane had his whole thing where it was without hope, there is no despair. And you need that. Well, this is Blake fighting that, saying hope is stronger than despair. Hope will rise up. Hope will, lead the way. And I love just those little moments of it with this guy who, again, this was a new introduction to the movie. This is his first, appearance in the movies. This is his first appearance in the trilogy, and I already understand him. I already got a feeling of what he's thinking, where he's going, and how he's going to handle in the future. And that again, it's just a crafted character who, if he can pull me in that quickly, and that closely to him, that I'm like, this is something really special.
Blake was a really, really interesting character because I agree with you. He almost was counteracting in those moments. Bane was using hope in a very twisted manner. He was using hope to then lead to despair. You're right. And in many ways to twist Gotham into, the image that he wanted, to really dig at Bruce with it and to punish and torture him with Gotham. Whereas Blake was using hope in a way kind of to spit in the face of what Bane was trying to do. And I liked that. I really liked Blake's whole role there. Now, Bruce starts leading his army. I love the sequence when the police officers are going down the street. And they're going up against the tanks. And when they finally open fire, like Bane tells them to, the Bat shows up. That was such a hoorah moment because it led to then a rally cry from the police. Because Modine's walking down the street telling them, we need to show them who the police are in Gotham. And, it's more of a bringing law and order back to Gotham City, trying to put things back to the right, even in the face of this danger. It's about giving Jim Gordon an opportunity, but it's also looking at, if we succeed, if we take down this bomb, we need to bring our city back. That moment was so great when you saw, my heart was going out to the police officers that were in the front line, because they had to know going down there that a lot of them were going to fall. Just the way that whole stretch was set up, you saw this massive amount of police officers coming down, going against these people with machine guns. And it was just such a wonderful, powerful fight sequence of two different belief sets, one of chaos and one of order.
Oh, God, yeah. That, for me, those are some really hoorah moments. Just, you get when you see them first lining up, and Matthew Modine's character comes up with the dress blues. And, of course, going back to the line where Gordon's like, hey, I'm not asking you to walk down Main Street in your dress blues, but you got to be a cop. You got to man up. You got to do your job. And he does show up in the uniform. I was like, oh, that was awesome. And just, you think about it, how much courage, does it take just to face that line? You're walking towards tanks. You have pistols, maybe some shotguns. There's a couple of guys with the assault rifles, but you are dramatically outmatched, overpowered, walking into a death trap, and you're just going, okay, let's do this. let's take him, let's go. It's gut check time. And they're all in line, just moving down the line. I cheered out loud. I know this one, I definitely cheered out loud when, the Bat showed up, boom, blew up the tanks, and he's like, get him! And you're just like, hoorah! I wanted to jump up and charge with them. Because you get that energy and that excitement going. And it was, I knew Modine, wasn't going to make it to the sequel. You knew he was a goner. It just had that feeling. Now, granted, part of me was hoping he'd make it. Part of me was hoping we'd see a scene with him, with his, arm in a sling, or him kind of like, bloody but doing okay. But no, that wasn't his path. That was he was martyred. He was, a casualty. But it was just that cool lead up moment, and that cool just moment even before that, just when they're getting the cops out, when Selina's blowing the opening to get the people out. There was just all these great just build up of the rise of the people. Yeah, Bane said this is your chance to rise up. Well, guess what? That wasn't the really chance. Here is your rise up moment. Here is the chance for you to fight the tyranny, to fight the man, who's actually been the cause of your destruction. This is your moment now. This is your time to be a cop. And I eat those moments up because a lot of times police officers, and there are a lot of justifiable occurrences that they're not getting the best press. There's a lot of times when there are people out there who abuse the badge, who abuse, the authority they've been given. But for every one of those crooked cops, there's 1,000 honest, decent, honorable people who chose that path because it's to protect and serve. They put their own, personal risk on the side for society. And it's the same thing with, with the fires, and even you can argue with teachers. There's a lot of really great teachers out there who, personal sacrifice for the children, who make it, about education, about the growth of our future. These are a lot of unsung heroes who the media loves to speculate the fall of, these people. The fall of, oh, look at this corrupt cop. Oh, look at this, scandal with overtime. Oh, look at what these teachers are doing here. They try to throw out the negative, and you get these moments of just this pure positive and this strength of character that you see, and you see them in movies like this. Sometimes you'll see them in real life, and you got to celebrate these moments. You got to say, yes, this is what I want to see.
That's true of any profession, though. I think in any profession you can pick out the people who are doing the negative, and you can spotlight them, and you forget the rest. And I think that's a problem. I think that's something. I think we like scandal more. I think we're geared. I think we're geared as a society to emphasize and focus on the scandal more. I think because it makes more interesting television than saying, "Hey, this guy did something nice." I hate to say that. I think it's kind of a truthful thing. Where I honestly would love to see good news. It would be kind of uplifting to see, like a balance, of maybe like, even from a newscast, take 10 minutes and just share some good news. Wouldn't that be nice? Hey, something nice happened today, and here's where. I think that's the way they should end a newscast, myself, because there really is good news to report.
You filthy criminals.
Jim, I want to go back to something you discussed earlier, because you talked about the Joker. And I think anytime we talk about what the Joker's role would have been in the third movie, you have to speculate, because changing that character, taking how powerful that character was in The Dark Knight, and trying to put him in this movie, you had to realize this script was changed drastically. It's funny, I think I would assume that he would have been in more of a Talia role in this film, where he was the one pulling the strings leading to the chaos, versus being the Bane character in this, if that makes sense. Him being like kind of the leader behind the scenes, puppet master, putting everything in place, because he held that role in Dark Knight.
Running things from inside Gotham, inside the prison maybe, or something like that, yeah. Oh, I could definitely see that type of story going on with him. And actually, you think about the big reveal about Harvey Dent. That could be a very interesting reveal coming from the Joker, because he's the one who twisted Harvey. He's the one who pushed Harvey to that edge. So that would be another powerful moment where the Joker's sitting there saying, and this is the case, deny it. It's the truth, right? This is what your people are, giving you. This is what, this hero has been telling you. Well, guess what? It's a lie.
Or, Bane breaks breaking him out of Blackgate and the Joker revealing it then instead of needing the speech from Gordon.
Right, yeah.
So that would be, I don't know. There was all kind of different options. I don't know who knows if Bane was originally intended for the third film or not. I don't know that we'll ever know what that would be. I would love to know what direction they were going in. And I'm guessing they probably won't reveal that because it seems like out of respect for Heath Ledger, which makes a lot of sense, they just, all the people that work so closely with him on Dark Knight kind of want that movie to stand on its own. And in this movie, they deliberately did not mention the character at all. And I don't know, I kind of don't feel like they needed to. There was nothing about this movie where I felt like, wow, here would have been a great spot for a Joker mention. I don't know how that would have worked.
I agree with you on that one. This is, I think it probably was out of respect. They didn't want to use him in a flashback or use him something like that just because they didn't want to, he presented just this great character. And I don't think they want to try to take away from it or diminish what was the Joker, what was the Joker movie, what was, that second movie. And I think it's, they really played off, they took the elements from it. And it was actually kind of funny, when I think about that second movie, when I think about the death of Harvey Dent, when that movie first came out, I was a little bit upset that they killed off Harvey Dent. Now I see that it wasn't just a movie ploy. It wasn't just let's just get rid of this villain because it'll make an interesting ending. It had ramifications towards the overall story. It had its place in this movie, and I have absolutely no issue whatsoever with the death of Harvey Dent anymore. It's completely erased, and the anger, any resentment or disagreement with it, I'm now saying that was a beautiful move and a beautiful story element. Right there, that's the, we always talk about if you're going to kill off a hero, you got to make sure it's something significant. Same thing goes towards a villain. If you're going to kill off the villain, you got to make sure it's something real and big, and there's a significant reason behind his death. Yeah. We now see the significant reason behind Harvey Dent's death, and I am absolutely loving it. I think that was just I was like, wow, that right there is why you do something like that.
Agreed, 100%. And I don't think we could have known at the end of Dark Knight that they were going that route. And it wound up being a great tool in this particular movie. Now, when the police were coming down and Batman eventually, we saw the battle and the fight, and Bane was fighting police officers, and Batman was making his way through the crowd, and you saw the two of them battle. What I loved was, yes, this is a returning Batman who's totally honed and retrained himself, but he's also going toe-to-toe with a monster and a beast. I love that the battle was very much a toe-to-toe battle. It felt like a Rocky. See, I'm a big fan of the Rocky movies, so I'm going to throw a Rocky reference here because one of the things I loved about the Rocky movies was, as the series went on, you saw that taking those punches to the head affected his eye, it affected his head, it affected his body. It got to the point where he could no longer box due to it. And I loved that sense of drama being built. There was an overarching story with Rocky, but then each film had their big, powerful battles, and each one of them seemed to get progressively worse. This was one of those battles where, first of all, I'm going to agree with you that this was one of my favorite film battles of all time. And it's kind of diminished for me to say it because it's Batman, so I'm going to feel that way because it was just one of the best Batman battles put on film ever. But in your case, I think throwing it out, not being as big of a Batman junkie as I am, I thought it was kind of cool to hear from your perspective on it. I loved seeing you felt the punches. I loved that when he was punching Batman's suit and then Batman would dodge out of the way, he's punching columns, punching cement columns. I mean, with those fists. You know how powerful those blows are. I loved seeing Batman just continue throwing powerful punches at him to the point where that device on his mouth, Bruce was punching it, so it was not to the point where it wasn't working anymore. And that was having
it.
Yeah, it was great. I thought it was just such a wonderful, cool use of a battle sequence. But it wasn't just that. We were seeing Batman actually going toe-to-toe and eventually just having the drive to win the battle. And the line where he had him on the floor and was telling him, I want to know the trigger. Who has the trigger? And, he wanted to see his plan fall. And then he said, then you have my permission to die. Throwing that back in his face again, that intimidation. This was not the same man who fought him in the sewers. This was the man who psychologically had rebuilt himself. This was the Batman we saw in the first movie coming back again. It was so great that he had that moment and we saw that hoorah. I mean, that whole battle in that second sequence was so totally different, but I don't think it would have had as much power if we hadn't seen him go through what we did leading up to it. This is how you build a battle. This is how you build a fall and then a rise. And that was great. When the knife went into his side, I was like, no, you can't stop this victory.
And I loved that fight sequence because, one, it was broad daylight. Normally, we don't see Batman operating in the daylight. He's the creature of the shadows in the night. Well, no, this is broad daylight because this is Batman rallying the police. This is the police rallying Batman. This is an army rising up to fight oppression. And I love this, sitting there fighting on the steps of City Hall. But one of the coolest things that a lot of, and it's one of the things that annoys me that movies will do this. And they didn't do it in this movie, and I cheered that they didn't do this in the movie. The others around them didn't stop fighting. Yes. There's so many times in a movie when the two main characters are fighting, everyone else kind of stops and sees what happened. No, the battle's still going on. There's chaos everywhere. And there was even a few unfortunate people who actually attacked Bane and Batman and tried to jump into the fight. And you know what? They got dealt with very quickly because they're not on that level. I loved seeing the chaos and anarchy of battle, because that itself is just this, in a weird way, there is a poetry, there is a dance, there is just a beauty to the battle. There is a beauty to that chaos. There's a beauty to that carnage. And I loved seeing that on the film as, you're focused on these two big battles, these two big giants just duking it out and throwing everything they have at each other, but completely around them. You see the continuation of everybody else fighting. You see Gordon battling, to get the transmitter blocker in place. You see all these other elements going on all at the same time. And it was just this beautiful meshing together that I was sitting there just like, I was like, yeah. I was like cheering and just hooping and hollering. And hopefully, I don't know if the people around me were annoyed or were cheering along with me, because I didn't actually notice anything going on in the theater other than what was going on in the big screen. This was one of those it just really pulled me in. I was yeah. It was wow. It was a great, just that great final battle moments. And I was just like, this is what you want in a Batman Bane fight. Right here, this is it. And then exactly right along with you with the knife in the ribs. I'm like, what? Oh, man. Outstanding. And it was just a great, beautiful double cross. Now, as I said from the beginning, I always knew that was Talia. I knew what was going to happen. And when she stuck the knife in him, I still was like, what? Because I got so lost in the moment of Bane versus Batman that I knew she was there. I saw her there. I knew he was about to say she has the trigger. I knew all that was about to happen, but it's still, when you see it, it's still kind of like shocked and awed me. And I was like, oh, now that's right there. That's how you do movie moments and sequences. That's this right here. This is the build up. This is the payoff. This is the climax to this great moment. So I was like, yes.
Yeah, and I didn't see it, and I was in a different place because I didn't see that coming. And that's what I loved about it. I loved that I didn't see it coming. The other thing I didn't see coming, and with the conversation he had with her, I should have seen it coming. I didn't see Catwoman showing up when she did. I loved that she popped in at that moment and shot Bane. Bane was ready to kill him. And I love that she came in and shot Bane, because I saw that going down differently. I did see Batman winning there, but I was completely convinced that Talia had stabbed him and turned the knife, and that was going to be what would kill him. Like, he would fight on, he would win, he would overcome, and that would be it. She shows up in that moment, and I love that the whole, your thing about guns? Yeah, not so much so on this end. And I love how that all played out, because it was really, really terrific. And then the two of them went in, and they did this battle, where it was a battle for Gotham. They were chasing after the vehicle with the detonator in it, because they had blocked the detonator, which I loved that. I loved how he used part of the bat as a way to block the detonator. Through, again, Lucius and Bruce coming up with this great plan. They come up with a way to block the detonator so that way they could then buy enough time. And again, even when that whole sequence is going on, they were trying to get this bomb to its original holding place to stabilize it. To tell you how twisted and how far Talia had gone, she set up the flood so that there was no way they could get the bomb to go back. I mean, accounting for every little detail, which puts our buddy Bruce then in this position where he's got to say, I'm defiant. I'm willing to give my life to save this city. And it was such a great sequence of events. I loved seeing the Bat and the drama up to there where Lucius is telling him, you got to get it east, you got to get it east, you got to get it east. Catwoman's helping, blast the vehicles. I love that motorcycle. I love the way the wheels turn in that weird side manner that they do. It just looks like a really cool futuristic prototype vehicle, which is what these things are supposed to be. These things are prototypes. And she was using it like an old pro, showing her skill set. And every piece of drama in that moment was great. Talia having her last words, it was almost like Khan from Star Trek 2, with my last breath I spit at thee, that stuff. I loved that drama. That's my favorite Star Trek movie. I love, which I'm a million Star Trek fans are going, yeah, we get it with SARS too. But I love Khan as the villain in there and the whole interplay with Kirk. She, in her dying breath, is laughing about the fact that she's got the flood going, that there was no way for them to get this bomb where it's supposed to go. And Bruce, again, taking it up into the Bat, having that moment with Gordon that we shared earlier. That was where I thought it was over. I thought, oh my God, they're really going to kill him. And even when he flew past Blake and Blake was watching it in the distance, another great example of using Blake as a vehicle to build emotion for us, because they really made a good job of using that John Blake character as our source of emotion. He was kind of our eyes into certain events, asking the questions we wanted to ask, and seeing it from our perspective. He was watching that thing blow up. So our last viewpoint of Bruce was still inside the Bat, not realizing that he fixed the autopilot, and that thing blew up. And for anybody listening to this, if you realized he fixed the autopilot before that went off, hats off to you. I didn't see that coming. I should have. It's a Batman thing to do. I did not see that coming. When that blew up, I thought he was done for.
Yeah. And, when the Selina shows up and blasts Bane, now I normally say, I say normally, I don't want to see a death of a villain. That right there was another great death of a villain. You hit him with a cannon, and that's what drops Bane. I cheered at that moment. Leading up to that point, I wasn't thinking it was going to be Selina. I thought she was going to show up when they hunt down Talia, and she was going to show up for the save there. I was thinking it was going to be Alfred. I actually thought, the choking, you would hear a sound of a shotgun. Bam! Alfred was going to be there and do so. I thought there was going to be an Alfred save, and that's what I was kind of figuring. And it would go back to that whole moment. You haven't given up on me, Alfred. Never. Just that moment that we had in the very first movie. I was kind of thinking that was going to happen, but to be honest, I was cool with Selina showing up, and I cheered and I laughed because everything you said was like, guns, not so much on this end. There was little bits of funny moments thrown in with the serious drama. And I think you need that in these type of movies, and especially with that type of character. Selina wouldn't just keep it all, let's go, focused, mission. No, she's gonna, she's got that adventure. She's got that love of life and that fight for life. And that definitely kept coming out throughout everything where she's doing, where, just her portrayal of this. I thought that, for me, was a great Catwoman, great Selina Kyle portrayal that they brought into this character.
And that fight for a new life, a life beyond all of this. Bruce was giving her that doorway, that opportunity to become a new person, to adopt a new identity. In many ways, he gave her the same opportunity he gave himself, not realizing that was what was going to happen with the whole thing. But, she's pleading with him on the bicycle, on a motorcycle when he first gets it, the Bat Pod, hey, come with me. Come with me. You've given them enough. Not yet. And he's got that moment where he hasn't you've given them everything. Not yet. That moment was just so terrific, so powerful. And then she comes back, and they're at that moment where he's ready to fly off in the Bat. They have this moment of connection again where she came back, he's doing this crazy thing, and the two of them are connecting over their own choices to be in this situation still, to still be there. And she gives him that kiss. And that their relationship throughout this entire film has progressed to this point where there's an understanding between the two of them that if this can end, we both want a new life after this. We want something different. We have to go into a new direction after all this. It leads to that moment where when the thing blows up and Bruce has used the autopilot, which we all know is what happened, it makes logical sense that he and this woman would have a common bond of connecting over, we've been through this great tragedy, this trauma. Trauma. We've won. We walked away from it. Where do we go from here? They're both in that place. clean slate for both of them. The clean slate for her offers her everything that she mentioned in the film. For him, it offers the opportunity to leave Batman as a symbol of Gotham. What they did with Harvey Dent as a lie, they can now do with Batman with the truth of what Batman was. And he's created this symbol that lives beyond him, walking away. Yet he can now live a new life somewhere else. That life that he maybe saw with Rachel, he can now live with Selina, who also is looking for that new life. And there's something they can connect with each other and all that. And I love that it was Selina because I'm a fan of the Earth 2 progression with the two of them being together. I love that in this movie it makes sense that the two of them went through enough together that you could see them building a relationship off of this, just from a common ground standpoint of understanding the need to walk away from an old life. I loved when Alfred showed up at the gravesite and he was crying. I gotta admit, almost started choking up there myself because, he's weeping, openly, how about how he failed. Jim Gordon did this amazing speech over there. My wife, it was funny, on the second time my wife goes, did you choke up there? And I'm like, no, I really didn't, but it was a powerful emotional moment. And I'd honestly be proud to say if I did, because I thought that was, the emotional roller coaster of this film was one of the strengths. It took you all over the place. I really loved the gravesites moments leading into Alfred eventually seeing them together. That was just wow.
Yeah, it's funny because I loved those moments, and I will admit I started getting choked up throughout those ending when the bat was flying off and he's getting ready to die. I'm just thinking they're gonna do it. They're going to do it. And I 100% was thinking he was going to die. And I got to admit, I started getting choked up. Just thinking that they were going to kill him off. And then that grave scene, when Alfred's looking at the graves of Thomas and Martha Wayne, and he's like, I failed you. You trusted me with him, and I failed you. And I was just like, oh my God, this guy. And I'm like, and it was just, it ate me up just knowing the pain he was going through. And there was, I got to admit, I got a little choked up. I'm a bit of an emotional kind of guy at times, and I was just sitting there, and you're like, "Okay, Jim, this is just a movie. This is just a movie." But it was, it was a really powerful emotional moment that it triggers in your life when you sit there and you think about those gravesite moments when you're sitting there and you're like, you make that pledge, that undying pledge on someone's grave that I will watch after them, I will look after them, I will make sure nothing happens to them, and then you're sitting there and saying, I failed you. I made you this promise and I failed you. And, it was just, it really, again, quality acting, pulling it off. We have, this was a quality piece of true acting that just, it got an emotional response from me.
Michael Caine rocks. He really,
oh my God,
really rocks.
Yeah.
And that's a role, Alfred's near and dear to me. And when you see somebody bring that to life and understand the character, that's one of the testaments, I think, to any actor or actress in these movies has been getting to the core of understanding who these characters are and treating them with the respect that we as readers of this material love. These are characters that are important to us. We understand them at their core. They mean something to us. They aren't throwaway characters. They aren't little comic booky, cartoony characters to us. They're well fleshed out, well written pieces of artwork to us. And to see actors bring them to the screen, to see directors, writers, bring them to the screen with that same reverence of understanding these are important characters that you would for any novel is exactly what the key to these movies are nowadays. Why are comic book films succeeding more and more? Because they're being treated with the same care and love that you would any character from any important and famous novel. That's the strength nowadays. When you treat those ideas and those concepts with the same respect, you're going to get this type of film, this type of development. And I'm glad this is becoming more consistent with what we expect from comic book films. I think this is in a completely different class, but I think, when you start seeing that, that's when a Man of Steel trailer. We haven't talked about that. We got to talk a little bit about this, right?
Oh, definite.
That Man of Steel trailer. It was a teaser's the best word for it because it wasn't really. I don't know if you consider that a full trailer, but oh my gosh, have you read Birthright?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it was funny on the forums. There was a lot of discussion about on the forum, the Facebook group. I still refer to the forums, but it's really our Facebook group now, which is our forum. there was discussion on there about is this changing his origin or things like this. I am definitely looking at this as more of a birthright kind of thing, because we saw that sequence with him as a kid. That was on the farm, right? Where, he had the cape on.
Yeah.
Didn't that he was at the farm?
Well, that definitely was him on the farm.
But then you see him later as that like shipman, where he's and I took that as just travels from Birthright. Birthright goes a little bit more into that time of his life when he was traveling before he became Superman. And I think this film's going to touch on some of that. I'm hoping that's what again, this is speculation. We saw a teaser, so I'm guessing that. Did you have an idea on what that was or what was going on there?
Well, here's the thing. When the promo first hit, they just said the DC logo and the other distributor. And then for my promo, it started off with him on the crab boat. And I watched that Deadliest Catch, so I'm like, that's a crab boat. And immediately I saw that, I'm like, are they doing an Aquaman movie? And then they flashed to the farm with the kid. I'm like, oh, this is Superman. Oh, and then they just kept going little bits here, a little bit there. I was like, oh, this looks good. And it was just, I was really looking forward to, just because then you see they flash to the young Clark, and I'm like, okay, he's traveling. And then I knew there's stories of him out where it's the post-Smallville, pre-Metropolis, where he goes out and he travels the world. So I'm like, I wonder if they're doing that kind of story with him. And then they show the scene of him flying, going supersonic. I'm like, I was just sitting there. I was like, yay. And I was just, because it wasn't you had trailers, I had previews. So they were right before the Batman movie. So we get the Superman preview. I'm like, yes, this is coming. And then bam, then they go into the movie. I was like, oh, that was awesome.
We had the same thing, dude. It was the same
I
setup.
thought you said yours came after the movie.
No.
Oh.
No, it was right before the film, just like yours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they didn't show anything after the film. When Batman film was done, we all went home. It was it was like 3:15 in the morning. Nobody, there was nothing afterwards.
Oh, okay. I thought. Oh, sorry, I misheard you. I thought you said they.
No. We had the same thing. We had the first two movies were just shown, and then when we got into the third movie, it probably showed the same way that it did for everybody. There were trailers at the beginning of it, and then the very last trailer was the one for Man of Steel. Then it went right into this movie. And I got to tell you, that sequence with him flying into the sky, I saw a funny little bit where Stan Lee was ranting about one of the things he dislikes about Superman is you never see any method of propulsion. There was a method of propulsion behind him. I mean, when he was shooting into the sky, it was like, whoa. It was, sometimes you'll see a superhero character where you go, I want to do that. When he was flying up there, I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to do the sense of speed.
Yes.
Wow. I mean, he looked like Superman. I mean, it's not like Superman nowadays. You've got this impression of Superman and what he looks like it was one of those moments where your jaw drops and goes, no, that's Superman. That's what Superman should look like today. Wow. I'm a believer. It's funny. They show a little teaser. Now I'm really, really excited for next year.
You saw the clip. Now you're a believer.
Oh, my.
I realized I hadn't sung in this episode, so I probably needed to get at least one song in.
Well, you did it at the beginning, didn't you?
But I didn't sing it.
No, you didn't. That's a good point.
So,
and now we've all got that treat. Is there anything else about Batman that you want to discuss or anything else that we missed that you...
I think we covered everything.
It took longer than the film. I love that.
Hey, come on. Yeah, there was so much that you had to talk about. And I don't know about you, but when I got out of the movie, I was a little bit kind of like there was a little bit of shell shock. And it was just like, wow. Yeah. And I'm just sitting there thinking. And my first thought in my head was, oh my God, how are we going to talk about this? Because there was so much going on. And I came home and I just started writing stuff. And I just started doing bullet points and just going through and just trying to remember every little bit and every little piece of the puzzle. And it was this was one of those things where just prepping. And then as I'm prepping, I'm rethinking of scenes. I'm like, oh yeah. And it was I'm going to see this movie a couple more times. I know that for certain. I didn't get to go because I saw it on Friday and we're recording this on Saturday, so I didn't really get a chance to do it 2 times. I was planning on going again yesterday, but things kind of got goofy. And then I was looking at the movie theater, and they had an early morning 9 a.m. Showing, and I was like, okay, 9 a.m. We got two, right before recording. I'm like, I'll be cutting it awful close, and I almost did it. And I'm like, nah, I'll wait. So either tonight or tomorrow, and then Monday, and maybe Tuesday again. This is a movie I just want to keep seeing over and over again because I absolutely love this movie. And when they release the box set of all three movies, I'm getting them. I'll have the Dark Knight marathon at my house where we'll do 1, 2, and 3 all in a row. One straight shot throughout all three movies. Make a day of it. So it's this is wow.
When you said shell shocked, this will tell you how shell shocked I was. You got to keep in mind my day. It was 6:30 was the start of this. I got home at 3:30. You know what I did when I got home? I pulled out Earth 1. I read it cover to cover. I went to bed at like 4:30. I put in a 10-hour Batman day.
No, that's a day.
I mean, I was so shell-shocked is the right word for it. I was so like, it was like you were almost speechless.
Yeah.
It was amazing, because it was an experience. And I'm sure whether you saw all three or you saw one of them, you got the same experience because the ending of this movie was so powerful. Such the emotional roller coaster thing, it just resonated with me. I went home and I reread Earth 1. I figured, I'll start reading it because we were planning to talk about it on this episode. We're actually going to save it for our next show because of just how big this discussion was on Dark Knight Rises. Silly me thinking that, we can put that on there too because we've got voicemails that I want to touch on before we wrap
Silly
up.
rabbit.
Yeah. And I really do want to get in the voicemails because listeners called in with some voicemail thoughts on Dark Knight Rises, and I'd like to have them on this episode, so we will do that. So we'll save that for our next one. But I reread it again, figuring I'll start reading it and then I'll finish it the next day. I was so pumped up that I was like, ooh, more Batman. And I was like reading and I enjoyed it. I just went through and really enjoyed the experience of rereading that book yet again, cover to cover. And then I went to sleep.
Yeah.
It's a great experience. And that's cool. One last question before we go now. My feeling is my preference would be after this reboot. I don't want to see them continue this because I feel this story is done. I feel like they did a great job with it. I said earlier in the episode that, sure, there's ways to bring him back because he's still alive. So that does leave open the option that you could bring Batman back to Gotham if the situation went there. I kind of like leaving this Gotham open-ended. Could Bruce come back? Sure. Could Blake take over and just become the new Batman and leave that? I think this is a world right now that you're better served to leave to fan fiction and that type of I'm a fan of that. It's like, leave us to speculate. What do we think would happen here? We've done a lot of that on this episode. And I don't, it's not one of those situations where one of us is right, one of us is wrong. It doesn't matter. That's part of the fun is that we care. This world continues on in some capacity. I think that's where this world should go. I don't want to see them continue it. I want them to reboot after this because I think that's the direction you should go in. I think this did it. It's a nice, really well done, contained piece. What about you? And there's no right or wrong answer. Do you want it to continue in this world like this world continued on, or would you like to see them reboot the franchise?
It's a tough call because on one hand, I do want to see this universe continue. Because we've had these discussions and we were thinking, and I've been thinking constantly about the character's growth and just what Blake would do as the Batman. Would he call himself Batman? I'm thinking he would, and here's how far I was taking this. He starts the movie off calling himself Nightwing. By the end of the movie, Gordon goes up to him and goes, no, you are Batman. And it's Gordon giving him permission to call himself Batman. Or Bruce would come back and say, no, you're Batman. But to be honest, I would leave Bruce completely out of this. I would have it be, it would be Blake and Gordon, bringing back the legend of the Batman. And I was immediately, first thought in my head would be Penguin. Because he's one of those characters that would survive the Gotham, who would be part of as one of the oldest families of Gotham. He'll be there to bring back Gotham to its great glory. And turns out he's really this villain, and the cops can't stop him. They need the Batman to come back. They need Batman to take him down. And and it just all these things are going through my head on how the story could play out. But as I say that, part of me is like, I kind of like that just occurring in my brain. I like this keeping it to myself, and I wouldn't want somebody else telling that story. I wouldn't want anyone other than Nolan touching this universe, or anyone other than Gary Oldman playing, playing Gordon. We got these characters that these are the people that I want playing them, and I don't think we'll get them coming back. And if we're not getting them coming back, I'd rather see somebody else's passion, somebody else's fire, somebody else who says, this is what I want to tell on Batman. This is the Batman story I want to tell. Now, if someone's got the passion to continue this universe forward, fine, go for it. Let's see what you got. But I'd rather somebody come out and do a complete new reboot, relaunch, just retelling of the story, but let it be their story that they want to tell. Let it be their version. Because Nolan came out, he had a very distinct version of Batman. He had a very distinct story he wanted to tell, and he told it in these 3 movies. Let somebody else who has that same passion, who has that same fire, tell their story. And, ideally, I'm going to lean towards passion. If someone's got a fire to tell a story, I'm going to support that story. I'm going to see what they got and see what comes out of it.
When you mentioned the people telling the story, you got to mention, there's so many cast and crew members that should be acknowledged, and I can't pretend I know how that all works. I know that Nolan and David Goyer should be given credit for a lot of the story on this one, Christopher Nolan and David Goyer. Also, Jonathan Nolan should be given, he's doing that great show, Person of Interest. He should be given a lot of credit for this. And just everybody, cast, crew, everything that brought this to life. This was a movie that clearly there was just a team of people with an amazing vision for how you do a Batman film. My worry would be if it continues, unless it was Nolan who wanted to do it and everybody mentioned, that it would somehow take away from these 3 movies. And I'd like to see them kind of remain their own contained piece. I kind of like that theory, unless there is a 4th, where he sees a script that he feels would connect with all this. Great, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, reboot it, do a new franchise, and maybe do a new franchise that can be more open-ended towards like you're mentioning, an interconnected DC universe, and go that route. I think they're ready for that. I think they're ready to build towards that. That's something I'd like to see.
They do a Batman that operates in the supernatural realm, that has friends with Superman and Green Lantern and the Flash, who knows these creatures who can do things beyond those of mortal men. Tell that story of a regular everyday guy operating in that kind of universe. That is something that we've never seen live action. We've seen it in the animated series, and we've seen it in the DVD movies, and but it's always been animated. It's always been that side. We've never seen an actual living person deal with that type of universe. I would kind of like to see that live action version of Batman. Tell that story of that character who has to deal with the supernatural and the super freaky, not just crime bosses and, guys with well, it's funny. I say guy. I was just about to say guys that are, and I was trying to figure out a way to describe Bane and make him sound normal, and you can't really. He's a monster. So, okay, maybe he did deal with some supernatural, super freaky stuff in Bane, but I'm like Clayface type of supernatural, or I'm drawing blank on some meta villains that he's faced, but just see Batman in that, operate in that, environment.
Agreed. Yeah, that's exactly what I'd like to see. Terrific movies.
Amen. Amen.
Holy hole in a donut!
Hey guys, it's Adam again. I predicted about the new Superman movie that's due to come out June 14, 2013, Man of Steel, and I really hope that this is the Superman movie that'll put Superman back on top where he belongs, because Superman really isn't that popular, and I really hope Man of Steel will be the movie that'll put him way back on top. I'm excited to see the teaser trailer with The Dark Knight Rises. I think it's going to be pretty awesome. So, yeah, see you guys.
See, it's funny. I'm looking at this with great hope like he is, too, because the way I look at it as, for Spider-Man, what made Spider-Man really popular again? I'm not saying that Spider-Man lost his popularity, but remember when that first Sony picture hit with Tobey Maguire?
Yeah.
I mean, Spider-Man was everywhere. I mean, that was like the coolest thing in the world. Superman needs one big film to make him that guy again. And I agree with him on that. And I think this film has, when I saw that teaser, that was just a teaser. If they can deliver that through the whole movie, that experience, they've got us. because I loved the cinema style of it. Like, it had a filter and a tone to it that I thought was really, really cool. And I don't know, I really was blown away by it. So I'm hoping this becomes that breakout film to bring Superman back to where Adam's saying, where he should be.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Soup needs, he needs this recharge. He needs this boom, just, reminding everybody that, Superman is Superman's the man. He's Superman. Come on. And I'm hoping that this gets regular, and to be honest, it's non-comic book fans. That's where, yes, the comic book fans are going to, probably go to it and they'll see what happens, but it's the non-comic book fans. Do they get excited about this? Do they get, wanting more Superman stuff? Will they support a second Superman movie, a third Superman movie? What's going to happen, on that end?
An animated series, Superman slippers, that kind of goofy stuff. That's what we really want to see.
Hey, I got a Superman Snuggie.
Mm-hmm.
I think I got a Superman apron. I think my folks got me an apron as well. So,
but you're a comic book fan. What
right.
I'm saying is for the general public to be after those things and that merchandising and to see Superman in other places and video games and where it's high profile games. I want an Arkham City with Superman. Where it's the character's popular enough that people will support that.
Yeah.
And Superman gaming's been very hit or miss. And a lot of times miss. So I'd love to see a great Superman game. Actually, speaking of games, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it has to do with they just released on the iPad, on the iOS, and I don't know where it's elsewhere, from Gameloft, a Dark Knight game. It's really good. It's very open world. It's based on the movie. And it's kind of like the Spider-Man games in the sense where you kind of run through this open world experience and you live the movie of Dark Knight Rises. And, it's with the touchscreen for gaming, it's something I've had to get used to because it's different than having a physical controller. And you control it like you would a physical controller, like, there's a virtual on-screen stick. But this game really handles well. The pacing's good. It moves at a brisk pace, but not so fast that the touchscreen controls get out of your realm. And it's a beautiful visual game. And it was kind of cool to see that tie-in. So I'd love to see... I'm glad to see more comic book games coming out. I know for Batman Arkham City, they announced the third game is going to be a prequel that takes place in the Silver Age, which is going to bring in the Justice League characters.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that because the Rocksteady games have been really good. So I'm glad to see that there's just as much excitement about comic book characters in other media because I think that gets people interested in comic books. I think that you make the character more accessible. Is it going to cause a mass flock to comics? No. But is it going to make more awareness there? Yes. And I think that's really, really important. I think that's where these things, having these characters there and invisible and important, once they start losing the characters, then you're going to lose the comics because people, aren't going to be drawn to the medium. And that's one of the things I'm glad to see. So it's cool stuff. Man of Steel, I hope succeeds. Oh, that trailer.
Yeah.
Hey, Sean and Jim, this is Caleb from Atlanta, Georgia. I just got out of the midnight screening of The Dark Knight Rises. I hardly know what to say. It was an amazing, amazing experience. I really couldn't believe Nolan could pull this off a third time, and he absolutely did, and exceeded my expectations in all the right ways. What I really liked about it, especially considering how he has taken Batman mythos in the comic universe and tied it so strongly into The Dark Knight and to Batman Begins with stuff like Year One and The Long Halloween. I liked that there was a sense of not Nightfall in play here, but No Man's Land, which is one of my all-time favorite Batman stories, if not my all-time favorite. Anyways, it was great, and it was great to be a Batman fan tonight. The theater I went to had about 18 different rooms, and they were all playing Dark Knight Rises, and they were all packed. Everyone was so excited. The theater just went wild. It was just a great night, and I'm so glad to be a Batman fan and to have experienced this movie. All right, hope you guys loved it as much as I did. See you later. Bye.
I love that after leaving a midnight showing, felt motivated to call. No, I think that's really cool because this really was one of those things. I love the movie theater experience because it's a shared experience. So it's one of the things with the podcast and why we have a voicemail line and why I love audio for commentary for this show. It's why we've moved away from doing emails on the show a long time ago and went to doing voicemails or email in audio comments, because I feel like that makes the podcast more of a shared experience then when we get stuff like this. And I feel like in some ways when people call up with stuff like this, like I was there with them because I'm hearing him geek out, and I don't really have much to say other than amen. I mean, I love that what he said, 12 or 13 theaters or something, 12 theaters I think he said, and they were all booked. I mean, it's crazy.
Hey, Sean and Jim, this is Ryan from Louisiana again. First off, I just wanted to say thanks for adding a link to your website for my new blog I just started, DC Gent. It really means a lot to me because you guys inspired me to start blogging about all this stuff that we love, and I just really wanted to say thank you for that. Second, I was wanting to get your guys' take on Jeff John's recent comments on the Justice League lineup change that we'll be seeing in a few months. He said that Shazam will be joining the team for sure, and we'll see some members possibly leave. My idea is that we're going to be seeing Hal Jordan leave the team. I believe that maybe the Justice League continuity is slightly behind the rest of the continuity in, say, the Green Lantern part of the universe. So Hal hasn't actually lost his power ring yet. He's not having to have Sinestro give him the power ring that he's using now. So maybe in the next few months we'll see Justice League catch up to where the Green Lantern continuity is, and Hal will lose his ring and no longer be able to be part of the Justice League. I wanted to see if maybe you guys agree with that, or maybe have any other ideas on who might be leaving the lineup so that Shazam can take their place. Keep up the great show, guys. Thanks.
I was always under the impression from the beginning. First of all, I agree with his comments that the Justice League timeline, and I think that's true of any book. I don't feel that like all of July's books, for example, that we're reading right now, are all happening the exact same time. And I don't want it to be forced that way, because I think that really is limiting for creators to tell their stories. I do feel that like events that have happened this year, except for the titles that have been designated as happening, 5 years ago and that type of thing, are basically happening in the same year. But I don't feel like from month to month that every title's happening at the same time. So I agree with him that what's happening in Justice League isn't necessarily going to be reflective of what's going on in the Green Lantern or Batman universe just yet. They will when they designate to us that, hey, they've happened in that time. But as far as the lineup goes, I was always under the impression with Justice League that lineup that they were showing us was the initial opening squad, and that they were going to add members on as time went on. That was always and I think when they introduced Justice League, that was supposed to be the idea, that down the road we're going to get new members. I'm agreeing with him that I think Hal's going to be replaced with the new Earth Green Lantern. I think that's going to happen. Or I don't know who else, would necessarily take his spot, but I would think that would be who it would be. And that teaser that was coming up for that Trinity War did feature Shazam and Black Adam, so I always thought they were going to be on the team. I saw Hawkman, I think, in that teaser too. So I'm wondering if he's going to be part of the team or not. So I don't know. I don't know who else is going to be a member of the team or not, who's going to swap in, who's going to swap out. I don't want a whole bunch of that lineup changed. We know Cyborg's going to be there because he's going to be friends with Billy.
Yeah.
So he's going to stick around. I'm guessing we're going to keep Superman. I'm guessing we're going to keep Batman. And I would guess we would keep Wonder Woman. I'm not 100% sure, though.
Part of me was thinking we're going to lose one member of the Trinity. And I'm not exactly sure who's going to leave. I was leaning towards either Wonder Woman or Superman leaving the Justice League. And this is just based on kind of a gut feeling, not anything I've read or seen or whatnot. This is just one of those, when they first started talking lineup, changes, and they said people are going to leave, my first thought was we're going to lose one of them, if not, maybe even two. Maybe I can't say, I don't see Batman leaving. As much as he likes to focus on Gotham, he likes to be part of the Justice League because he likes to keep an eye on them. He likes to be, involved in that larger end scale, and they do need his mindset, his strategy, his presence in the Justice League. I think he's a key piece they can't lose. And with getting Billy in there, you kind of have a power level shift that you could lose Superman and not lose complete power levels and not be to a point where you're too weakened to handle situations and whatnot. So I part of me thinks we may be losing Superman in the Justice League.
I'm going to disagree. And I'll tell you why, because I think one of the things that they're trying to do with this Justice League is show them as being the premier team of the DC universe. They want them to be on Avengers level. Where the Justice League, again, looks like that team. I don't think you're going to launch this team with all of those characters and drop most of them. I think what we're going to see is, I think there's a storytelling reason for Green Lantern to leave. There's a storytelling reason to bring in Shazam now. Cyborg would be nuts to get rid of. Aquaman, I think, needs to be a part of this team because it sounds like he's going to be doing the rally cry for them all to step up their game a little bit. I don't see storytelling reasons for Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman to leave. Now, where I'll put a little disclaimer on that, and you may turn out to be right then, if there winds up being a continuity storytelling reason for any one of those three to leave, then they would. A la what Green Lantern is. But for the reason this team came together and where they're going to go, I don't see it happening. I see more additions to the team than people leading. Because if Green Lantern's leaving, do you take Flash off the team? You got to have the Speedster, right?
Yeah, I can't see them getting rid of the Flash. Just because I don't see Barry wanting to leave a team like this. For the same reason that Aquaman is going to be kind of leading a rally cry, I see Barry also leading in with that rally cry saying, yes, he's right, we need to do this. We need to step up our game. We need to be the Justice League. And that's, to me, that's a Barry style and feel to him.
To me, it seems early to lose Superman, Batman, or Wonder Woman. Because if you think about the storytelling that's been done in this last year with them, I feel like the team is just coming together. So at this point, to lose those members, it just doesn't make sense to me. I feel like there's storytelling reasons for Green Lantern to leave. So you're going to get a new Green Lantern. There's a storytelling reason to bring on a Shazam. They've been talking about... I'm thinking we're going to see more additions than deletions from the team. I might be wrong, and if I am, that's great. Your power sense makes sense for Shazam versus Superman. Meaning Shazam being on the team, you don't need Superman necessarily. I don't know. I think we might see a reason why this team could use both of them.
Oh, definitely. As I said, I'm basing mine on just a gut feeling. So,
and you could be right. I'm just throwing out my speculation.
Yeah.
I don't know that I necessarily see it that way, but that doesn't mean that I'm right. So we'll see how it goes. That's interesting. I like the idea of more members coming on the team. I'm always excited for that because I think that's good for a team book. I think sometimes, though, when you take too many members off of a team book, you start to take away the draw to the team. So I think they need to be careful, and I'm sure they're going to be, in how they do that. So I don't know. We'll see what kind of roster they pull in there. I'm excited for it because the book's been great. I'm a big Justice League fan. I love the backup story in the back right now with Shazam. I think it's great. I love the main story. I love what they're doing with that writer of the Justice League biography. How he all of a sudden has, because of circumstance, he now blames the Justice League, which I think is great. It's been a great book. So, in my eyes, they can't do any wrong with this book right now. Ryan made mention to my shouting out, and I put links to his blog up on our website that'll also be in the show notes. But for anybody out there, I try to keep up with listeners and friends of the show's podcasts and blogs and things like that. In the course of a week, there's so much that's involved in keeping our podcast going and, maintaining contact on Facebook and social groups and things like that. I miss things. If you've got something out there and I've missed it, ragingbullets@gmail.com is our email address. Please contact me. Contact me through Facebook, wherever, and please let me know what you're doing and make sure I put links. Especially, there's a lot of people that do cross-promotion of us. blogs, fan sites, they don't have to be DC related. If there's something out there you're like, hey, your listeners, I think, would be interested in this, I'll put links up to you. I love doing that stuff. So please do, or, and feel free to call in our show on the voicemail line like Ryan just did. I love getting that word out there. To me, the best place, first and foremost, to hit our entire listening audience is by getting you on the podcast. So if you've got something out there, shout it out on our show. I want to get it out on the show. If I missed you and I haven't put you up there, call it in or email me or whatever is easiest for you. But let's get that resolved, because I always want us to be good for cross-promotion for anybody out there who's a part of our community. So please don't hesitate to do that. It's never an inconvenience. It's, I feel that people have patted us on the back and given shout-outs to us all over the place. I want to do the same thing for you. So please do not hesitate. It's never an imposition. I want it to happen. And I honestly feel that voicemail is one of the best ways to do it, especially if you put links and things in your voicemail, because then I can get them right on the podcast. And I think our podcast is first and foremost where you hit all of our audience. So please make sure that we get you on the show. It's cool stuff.
How you doing, guys? This is Brandon calling out of New Orleans. I just want to call and make a couple of comments about The Dark Knight Rises. I went to the midnight premiere last night. And first off, completely disappointing about what happened in Denver. It's just a shame that somebody would take something that's supposed to be so positive and a character that, overcomes a Joker and overcomes that villainy and tyranny and actually use that to inspire real world events. If that's what he did, I don't know. It's tragic and that's a shame. But to touch on the bright side, the movie was fantastic. I can't believe, they did everything I expected and more. For 3 months now, I've been ranting and raving that, the mantle was going to be taken over, and I thought a Dick Grayson was going to come in, which basically Edward Blake, Robin character turned out being in the end. I mean, spectacular. They broke the bat. He came back. Everything. It just, you wanted to know if he was going to break him, if he was going to die, if he was going to live happily ever after. It did everything. And it was epic. I mean, just incredible. I don't know what other people think about it. I have to go see it again because I don't know how much I like it, because that's just how much was in the movie and how big it was. It was too big to take in at one time. I have to go back, but it has been flooding here in New Orleans all day, so I have been unable to leave my house to even get to a theater. So I'm glad I made it out to the midnight show last night, which was not an empty seat in the house. The theater was more packed than I've ever seen in my life. Couldn't find a parking spot. I actually had to park in a Home Depot next to the movie theater where other people were parking, because the theater I was at happened to have been showing it at midnight, at 2 o'clock, at 1 o'clock. It was mad. It was crazy. So, anyway, I love the show, guys. Kind of a new listener, started 3 months ago, and I have listened to everything since the New 52 lineup to today now. And great job. Y'all are fantastic. Keep it up.
Thanks for calling. Actually, I love that these theaters are getting overwhelmed with, people parking. I love that you had to park somewhere else to get to the theater because they were staggering it all night long. I'm a fan of that kind of stuff. I mean, not just for superhero movies, just in general, when, big movies are coming out, that it's exciting to go to the theater. Because I do think it's an experience, I shared it earlier on the show, that you can't get anywhere else when you go to the theater. There's a different sort of vibe, a different sort of environment. And I think it'll be a sorry day when we only can watch movies at our home. There's an ad they do at our theater, and I'm sure it's some of the people listening, where they show a big image and then they shrink it down to show like how diminished, a theater experience would be on a smaller screen. Yeah. And then they explode it out. It's an advertisement for the sound system in there. But I like the theme of that. Don't get me wrong. I love watching movies at home. I'm a movie junkie. My wife and I love doing it. It's a great Friday night event. But there's something special about seeing. So I think certain films you have to see in the theater. Great example would be Avatar. Avatar loses something if you haven't seen it on the big screen in 3D with the glasses on, in that like overwhelmingly huge experience, because of the way that film was designed. This movie, Dark Knight Rises, was meant to be seen on the big screen. I mean, it was meant to be seen on IMAX. We don't have an IMAX close by us that shows this, which you and I would have been at IMAX. I mean,
oh god, yeah.
I mean, that would have been the way to see this film. And I saw Batman Begins on IMAX in California. I happened to be there at the time, and the theater there, and I was packed to go see it. I didn't see the premiere of it. It was like 2 weeks later. I ended up seeing it. I ended up going there in the summer, and it was great to see that in IMAX. But there's experiences in the movie theater that you don't want to lose that. And I just love him geeking out about what it was like. You can't the parking, and you can't get there. And unfortunately, the tragedy that goes on. The sad part about the tragedy is, anytime those tragedies happen, understandably so, they make people afraid. They make people worried. I think there's a good thing that comes out of that in the sense that we all become a little more cautious and careful, which hopefully will protect everybody and make everybody a little safer. So if there's one positive from any horrific event, it's that, we don't ignore it. We acknowledge it, we internalize it, we make it a part of us, and we learn from it. So hopefully there's some meaning out of not, the horror that comes from it. But it's such a tragedy on a weekend that really for everybody who went to the theater should have just had a great time experiencing that with friends and family, or even just themselves, whoever, whatever the people were with. And that's very, very sad that is unfortunately clouding what otherwise was a terrific experience for the weekend. And I feel very, very bad for anyone affected by that still. I don't even think I have the right words to express what that's like, because I personally, with my enjoyment of it, because I didn't know about this event, I was able to just enjoy it without realizing till later that this horrid thing happened. And I want everybody else to have had that experience, versus having tragedy marking this. You don't want anybody hurt at an experience you enjoyed. You want them to have had that same enjoyment, to have that experience, and to be able to take that and be able to geek out with it like we're able to. And I feel truly sad for anybody who was not able to do that and went through some terrible experience, horrific experience that affects their life because of somebody else's poor choice, somebody else's trauma. It's a bad thing. So I'm sorry that happened.
Hey, Sean and Jim, this is Matt_Magus yet again. Hey, I'm in the middle of your San Diego discussion Comic-Con special episode thingy, and I just wanted to talk a minute about Damien, since that's the section I'm in right now. There's been some discussion over the last few episodes that you two have been on, particularly in the one covering the Bat universe, about the differences between how Batman views Damien killing as opposed to Jason Todd. There's something you should remember. Jason Todd wasn't initially taught to be a killer. Jason Todd originally learned how to fight from the Bat, and as such, it's sort of a different scenario. Damien's been taught since he could walk to go for the killing blow each and every time, to kill. So every time he gets into a physical confrontation, he is literally fighting his own muscle memory to keep from killing people. And I think Batman understands that, and that's why he's a lot more lenient with Damien than he would have been with Jason. Now, also, I'm sure that, being the physical father of the boy has a little something to do with it, but I think it's more that because, Bruce is the ultimate martial artist. He understands muscle memory. And he knows that this boy is going to have a nearly impossible battle. It's an uphill battle to fight your own body's natural reaction to stressful situations. And I think that's why he's pretty much let it slide that Damien's killed, 3-4 people now? Anyway, I thought I'd throw my 2 cents in for that discussion. And I'm about to stop and pay a toll, so I will talk to you guys later.
I do agree. First of all, you and I have talked about this. There's been some joking on certain elements of it, but then there's also some truth to it, too. I do agree that he views Damien differently. I think we see a very disturbed Bruce Wayne over the fact that he's trying to teach his son a better way, put him on a better path. I do think, though, we're also giving Damian a little bit too much leeway with that muscle memory thing. Because I don't think it's just muscle memory. Damian, like nobody, Damian made the choice to kill nobody. It wasn't a gut, it wasn't oops, my arm flipped and I killed him. It was, he killed nobody because he thought it was the way to protect his father. He thought he was doing the right thing there. Now, I do agree totally with what Matt's saying in the sense that Bruce is treating him differently because of the way that Damian was raised. There is an upbringing there, and I do agree 100% with Matt there. There is a certain amount of leeway he's giving there. But I also think this is something you can see Bruce is troubled by this, and I like it. I think it's very good for the storytelling that he is doing what Matt's saying, but then that's not – he isn't viewing him differently in the sense that he's looking at that idea of killing. It goes against everything that he is. And it's bothering him that he can't set this kid quite on the right path. He's made a lot of headway with him. But I like that they're exploring part of the trouble that this brings to Bruce with the fact that his son has done this more than once. So I'm not really disagreeing with Matt, other than I don't think that I think muscle memory is a cop-out. Because I think that's saying that Damian has no conscious choice in this. His arm just does this. And I think muscle memory affects how Damian fights and how he operates and things like that. But I don't think I think Damian kills consciously when he does that. I think he makes those choices to kill, because he did with nobody. I think that was really clear in the storytelling, and I like that. But the muscle, I'm a fan of muscle memory, so I'm not totally disputing the idea of muscle memory. I just think Damian's killing because Damian believes it's the right thing to do in those moments.
There was a very, really cool comic that was Wolverine and Spider-Man. And it took place over, on the other side of the Berlin Wall, and it was before the fall of the wall and all that. And there was this cool moment where a female friend of Wolverine, she was a spy, one of those spy secret agents, and those contracts after her. And Wolverine and Spidey were kind of, fighting and duking it out, and she had a kill order on her. And the only way to stop the kill order was her death. And Wolverine wasn't going to let it happen. And in the middle of this fight sequence between Spider-Man and Wolverine, she got in the way, basically making Spider-Man think she was Wolverine. He throws a punch full strength because he thinks it's Wolverine, hits and kills her. That is muscle memory. That isn't, that is a, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. That's not the kind of stuff that Damian's been doing. Now, granted, yes, Damian his whole life has been trained to kill, but he is, you have to make that conscious thought, I am going for the kill shot now. It's not just in the middle of the fight that every thought is a kill shot. It's the block, fight, strike. But when you're going for that specific, I am going to go for the kill, there is a conscious thought. It's the kill shot isn't normally a just reflexive action. It is a conscious, boom, time to end a life now. And it's that process, that mindset that Damian has that Bruce is, the most trouble with and the most fighting to, get him to get away from that thought that, yes, it is okay to take a life. Yes, it is justifiable at times. The ends justify the means. No, not for Bruce, not on this line. Killing someone is killing someone no matter what. And that is the fundamental code of the Bat. And Damian has the ends justify the means mindset that it's okay to do this if it's a really bad person, or if Bruce's life is directly, if this guy's going to kill Bruce, it's okay to do this. And I think that's the big thing with Bruce, wanting Damian to get away from that thought process, wanting Damian to stop allowing that death is okay in his mind.
Yeah, it's funny how I agree. There's a lot of what Matt was saying that I actually really agree with, because there is a distinction between Damian and Jason. I would actually love to see some storytelling where Bruce and Jason eventually have that talk.
Yeah.
Because I think that there is an opportunity to at some point have that with Jason's status quo now, which I like how that's evolving as well, because I would like to see a lot of what Matt's talking about discussed in there, because I do think, Jason would come back and say, well, why, is he getting a pass over some of these things? And I think Bruce, there's a part of Bruce that would be offended that somebody he trained like Jason would head down this path. Although I think there's also a part of Bruce that feels responsible for Jason heading down this path.
Yes.
So I think that there's a part of Bruce that's torn in a different way when it comes to Jason. I find it endlessly fascinating and interesting that, one of the great things is I love that Matt felt motivated to call because these characters matter to him and his thoughts about them matter to him. I love that kind of stuff because it leads into this. I mean, I think this is a great debate to have about these characters and how we view them, because I think that's something in the New 52 that is being fleshed out now, and we're just seeing these ideas germinate and go further. And it's one of the cool things about the Robin progression with having all of these characters and having them all around is each one of them's distinct and different, and you're going to have that kind of conflict arise due to that. I wonder how much that's going to be dealt with. The whole Jason Todd versus Damian with the distinction between the two of them. It almost seems like they have to deal with that because it's a missed opportunity otherwise.
And with the new status quo, with the new origin, I'm kind of curious to see what was the path that led Jason to being the Robin, and seeing where, because that could also be a huge distinction and difference. We know Jason's going to be coming from a very troubled home and a very problem, environment. Because before the reboot, Bruce, in his farewell message, kind of, what little they showed, he did imply that there was something else going on with Jason that no one ever knew about, that Bruce wanted to protect him from and, help him get over. So I'm kind of curious if that part's going to still be around, if we're going to see that, because that could very easily change this conversation again, if we find out more of Jason's backstory. For all we know, Jason could have a really sick and twisted, upbringing that, could rival Damian's. Now, it'll be difficult because Damian was raised by the League of Shadows, but you never know with Gotham.
Yeah. I remember one of the first origins I read of Jason Todd, and it's been so long. He was stealing the tires from the Batmobile. So I mean, it's a different sort of kid and a different sort of upbringing. I don't know. I'm curious to see where that goes. But Matt makes an interesting point. I think what Matt's referring to, I don't know if you and I made a comment in passing, because I don't remember having that much passion over what Matt's talking about. I think we were joking about this. I remember at one point saying, why can Damian do this and Jason doesn't get a pass or something like that? And I think we were, being tongue-in-cheek, and we were joking about that. I agree with Matt, actually, that Damian's foundation is drastically different than Jason's. I think you and I have always agreed about that. Yeah. So I think anything we might have said otherwise, Matt, was more us joking around than being actually really serious about that. Because there definitely is a difference between the child of both kids. Well, although we'll see what happens with the upcoming Zero issue of Red Hood and the Outlaws, which focuses on Jason's upbringing. I just want to remind everyone about our show voicemail line. It's 1-440-388-4434 or Dr. Norge on Skype, and that's always available on our show website and in the show notes for the podcast episodes. We love having you part of the show. Whether you agree with us, disagree with us, fall somewhere in the middle, or just want to get your own thoughts on there about anything going on in comics, please feel free to call in and share your thoughts on the show. I air every voicemail. I love having voicemails on the show. I think it's a great way to have this interactivity that we just had with Matt and everybody else who just called in on this episode. So thank you for everybody getting in your thoughts on things like Dark Knight Rises and recent comic book news and recent episodes of the show. I like that our episodes don't just end when we stop recording, that, it starts new dialogue and starts us into new directions. And sometimes there's things that we didn't expand enough on or we weren't clear on that need to be clarified in the show. And I love making sure that we do that. So thanks again for everyone who called and participated.
Holy caffeine!
Once again, sponsoring us this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com, 52 omnibus hardcover, all 52 of the weekly issues. $150 regularly, 40% off, only $90 over at InStockTrades.com. Remember, they're doing those special sales on DC Trades. They have them at 60% off and then archive editions at 50% off. It's a great opportunity to stock up on all those amazing collected editions that you've been looking for. And I want to thank DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com for continuing to support our show. Jim, our next episode is going to be airing August 1st. It's Wednesday, August 1st. I'm going to need a couple extra days because I'm going on a vacation. And figuring with the meaty episodes we've done lately, where we just came back with that San Diego show and all that, it'll give people a chance to kind of get caught up with our podcast episodes. So it's going to be a little over a week till our next episode. It's going to be Batman Earth 1's going to be our first feature. And then we're going to start our discussion, which is going to be a 2-episode discussion of things like Before Watchmen. So I'm really excited to jump in to talk about the great event that is Before Watchmen, so that'll be on that episode. So we will see everyone on August 1st.
Bye! Flying through space and time, 1,000 different lifetimes. Faded for love and loss and incredibly clear sightlines. Swinging your mace around, such a practical outlook. Helping the JSA and occasionally supporting your own book. Hawkman, Hawkman. Eagle eyes can't see. Hawkman, your plan. And what you do to me. Hawkman. Are closing in, be they then guard or Egyptian. Working so hard to thwart you and Hawkgirl's mission. The odds are not on your side, and danger seems to stack up.